Hey everyone, and welcome back to Dark Sleep Radio. I'm here to share real-life encounters with beings beyond our world, hoping to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. Deep in northern Michigan's Upper Peninsula, I've been setting up trail cameras in the woods around my family's old cabin for years. Mostly, I was tracking deer and the occasional coyote. Locals always talked about strange nighttime sounds, but I never paid much attention. Woods are full of weird noises, owls, wind, you name it. Last fall, everything changed. I decided to expand my camera network, pushing farther into the forest than ever before. The area was remote, thick pines, rocky ground, and barely any trails except some old logging roads. Some people claim there's a low, strange hum at night, like the trees are vibrating. I'd never experienced it myself. One afternoon, I headed out with my gear. 5 cameras, batteries, memory cards. My old German Shepherd, Scout, came along. Slow but loyal, he stuck close as I worked. I spent most of the day setting up cameras along a small clearing near a stream, positioning them on trees where deer might pass. Nothing special, just standard motion-activated infrared cameras. The weather was cool and damp from earlier rain, with cloudy skies. That night, I checked the first camera's footage on my laptop. Standard stuff, a few deer, some raccoons, nothing out of the ordinary. Scout slept by the fireplace, as always. The next day, I went to check the cameras in person. When I reached the second camera, mounted on a tall pine near the stream, something was wrong. The mount was empty. Not just fallen or damaged, but completely gone. No wires, no broken pieces, no trace. I spent hours searching the area, methodically checking every inch of ground for any trace of disturbance. No footprints, no drag marks, nothing. The earth remained untouched. My scouts moved around, sniffing and clearly bewildered, unable to pick up any familiar scent. The cameras were still firmly in place, their positioning unchanged. I carefully verified the memory cards and batteries, finding everything appeared normal. But when I reviewed the footage that night, an unsettling pattern emerged. Each camera had experienced an identical blackout, exactly 11 minutes of complete silence. The timestamps were precise and consistent across all devices. When the recordings resumed, they showed absolutely nothing unusual. I scrutinized the clips before and after the blackout, searching for any hint of movement or anomaly. The forest looked completely ordinary. This seemed impossible, given the cameras were different models from separate batches, installed on various trees and powered by fresh batteries. I attempted to reset and reformat the memory cards, but the exact same 11-minute blackout occurred again the following night. Increasingly uneasy, I began staying in the cabin, remaining vigilant. Scout grew restless, pacing near the windows and growling at unseen shadows. An eerie silence had settled over the forest, as if something was waiting. On the third night, I heard it, a sound unlike any animal or wind. A low, rhythmic tapping emanated from deep in the woods, perhaps 100 yards beyond the clearing. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped outside with Scout close behind. The moment we reached the tree line, the tapping ceased. No rustling, no movement, just absolute silence. I spent nearly half an hour scanning the darkness with my light, seeing nothing. The next morning, a strange marking appeared at the clearing's edge. It looked like a series of small, perfectly straight parallel grooves about a foot long. Unlike animal trails or footprints, these seemed almost carved into the dirt, as if something solid had been pressed and then removed. Over the next few days, strange occur. Onset started piling up. Cameras vanished without explanation. Footage developed odd, synchronized blackouts. Unexplained sounds would emerge at night, disappearing whenever I tried to track them down. Mysterious markings kept appearing in different spots near the cameras. Scout's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He'd bark at seemingly empty spaces, snap at invisible targets, and pace restlessly. Something was clearly unsettling him. During one of the camera blackouts, something unusual emerged. Using infrared mode, 3 cameras captured faint, blurry shapes deep in the woods. These figures were thin and elongated, standing unnaturally still. Glowing spots resembling eyes punctuated their shadowy forms. The images lasted mere seconds before vanishing. I zoomed and enhanced the photos, but the figures remained indistinct. Showing them to a wildlife biologist friend, he suggested they might be deer or elk. Yet he agreed the shape seemed too tall, too rigid, too unnatural to be normal wildlife. Keeping the experience to myself, I knew others would likely dismiss my observations as imagination. On the final night, I set up all cameras, disconnecting them from my laptop. Sitting outside in the clearing, I smoked and listened. Thick fog surrounded us. A thin crescent moon hung overhead. Scout lay quietly beside me, unusually calm. At precisely 11:47 p.m., familiar tapping resumed, this time closer. A faint electrical buzzing accompanied the sound. Sweeping my flashlight toward the noise, I caught a brief glimpse of movement, something tall and slender slipping behind trees. I called to Scout, but he remained frozen, ears pinned back, teeth bared. Suddenly, the buzzing and tapping ceased. An abrupt temperature drop followed, accompanied by a strange chest pressure, as if the air had suddenly thickened. Checking my watch, I realized 11 minutes had passed. The cameras had stopped recording again during this interval. The next morning, I packed up, leaving most of my equipment behind. I'm Will Harper, and I've lived in Millerfield my whole life. It's a small town near a military base where everyone knows each other and nothing much ever happens. I work at the hardware store, nothing special. But last week, something strange began that made me want to record what happened. It started on a Monday night around 11, just as I was heading to bed. A low, constant hum caught my attention, like a distant engine idling, but different. This wasn't a noise that faded or shifted. It was a steady vibration that seemed to pulse through my chest more than my ears. At first, I thought it might be a late-night military drill, but when I asked around, my neighbors had heard it too. Night after night, the hum continued. Same time, same tone. It didn't sound like any mechanical noise I'd encountered before, even with the base so close. Strangely, it didn't seem to concern the soldiers or base security. People started talking about it at the diner and grocery store, mostly assuming it was something new from the base, but no one had official confirmation. My dog Rusty, normally a laid-back golden retriever mix, started acting differently. He'd stare out the back window toward the woods for hours, completely still, ears alert. Sometimes he'd emit a low, soft growl at something invisible. This wasn't like him at all. One midnight, I went outside to smoke and try to understand the hum better. The air was cool, the sky clouded. The woods behind the houses seemed darker than usual, almost consuming the streetlight. The hum continued, steady and vibrating through the ground. When I drove back home later, silence hung heavily between us. Sometimes I still think about those woods, the missing camera, the blackouts, the tapping, and those unexplained shapes in the infrared images. I haven't returned since. The woods were silent, except for a s, oft hum, and the sound of my boots against the ground. A faint orange glow caught my eye, deep among the trees. It wasn't like a normal campfire. This light was steady and soft, almost unnatural. I strained to see what it was, but couldn't make anything out. Suddenly, Rusty started barking, sharp, urgent sounds that broke the silence. Before I could react, he bolted into the woods, leash trailing behind him. I chased after him, but the forest felt oppressive, closing in around me. The hum grew louder, seeming to come from everywhere at once. When I reached a small clearing, the glow was strongest. The air felt thick and hot, almost suffocating. The grass was pressed flat, not by footsteps, but as if something had deliberately flattened it. Rusty was gone. I called his name, but only heard the hum and rustling trees. As I backed away, I noticed something strange in the clearing's center. A perfect oval, about 10 by 5 feet, was burnt black. The surrounding grass and leaves were scorched, but the rest of the clearing looked untouched. A metallic smell, mixed with burnt wood, hung in the air. I eventually found Rusty deep in the underbrush, shaking and whining. When I told Kara about it, she dismissed it, saying I'd been outside too long. The next morning, everything changed. The sheriff arrived with uniformed men from the base, blocking off the woods and putting up warning signs. They talked about hazardous materials, but gave no real explanation. The hum disappeared the night before their arrival. When I drove by yesterday, the scorched patch was fenced off, covered with a tarp. Base personnel watched the area closely, their cameras tracking any movement. What struck me most was how life continued normally. Kids played outside, people went about their days, and the base operated as if nothing unusual had happened. We were driving back from visiting my sister in rural Vermont, taking the old two-lane Route 97 that winds between thick woods and open farmland. It was late, just past 11 p.m., and a damp chill hung in the air from an earlier rain shower. Jenna was half asleep in the passenger seat while I focused on the dark road ahead. About 10 miles from her place, past the always closed general store, something caught my eye off to the right side of the road. At first, I thought it might be a prank or a stuck headlight, but this was different. A pale, almost whitish beam stretched down through the trees, steady and clean, unlike anything I'd seen before. The light wasn't coming from any visible source. No helicopter, no drone, no street lamp, just a column of light cutting straight through the branches to the forest floor. I slowed the car and blinked, thinking I was imagining things. Jenna stirred, looked over, and rubbed her eyes. "Hey, do you see that?" I asked, pointing. She squinted and nodded. "Yeah, that's weird." We pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, both curious now. The beam looked about 100 feet from the road, creating an almost daylight-bright spot in a tight, narrow shaft. The radio was off, and an eerie silence surrounded us, just the occasional rustle of leaves in the night breeze. No humming, no buzzing, nothing mechanical that you'd expect from such an intense light. We stepped out of the car. Every night after that, a deep hum lingered, and the woods felt empty, like something wasn't quite right. I'm still unsure what I saw or what that patch in the woods means. Rusty, my dog, hasn't barked at the woods since. Sometimes he sits at the window, staring out as if waiting for something to return. That's my story. I don't have answers. Just a week when everything seemed off and a silent, scorched mark in the forest that doesn't belong. The forest had gone silent, muted in a way that felt unnatural. I held my flashlight steady, its beam fixed on a small patch of ground through the thick underbrush and old pines. Toby, our usually skittish terrier, sat unnervingly still, staring intently into the woods like he could see something we couldn't. The light seemed to reach down but not penetrate beyond the trees, almost as if something was blocking it just beyond the foliage. Toby suddenly growled low and pulled at his leash, straining toward the mysterious illumination. Jenna held him back. "No," she whispered. "Something's not right." I agreed, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what felt off. Looking up, I searched for a possible source, maybe a spotlight from a plane or a search helicopter, but the stars remained unchanged, offering no explanation. "Let's go," Jenna said. I nodded, and we got back in the car. As we pulled onto the road, I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror. For a brief moment, the beam widened slightly before vanishing, plunging the forest back into darkness. Over the next few nights, the same pale, steady light appeared around the same area off Route 97. Sometimes closer to the road, sometimes farther back, always shining down through the trees with no visible source above. I tried taking photos, but the beam never showed up in any of them, as if it existed only when viewed directly. Neighbors laughed when I mentioned it, dismissing my observations. No one else seemed to notice or care. Then strange occurrences began around our house. Toby became restless at night, barking at windows and staring into the darkness. When I'd step outside to investigate, I'd catch glimpses of shadows moving just beyond the tree line. Not animals, just indistinguishable shapes. One night, Jenna saw something that changed everything. That was the start of something we couldn't explain. Toby and I were sitting on the porch when the beam appeared again, deeper in the woods this time. Something felt different. Toby went stiff and growled, and a heavy silence settled around us. The beam pulsed briefly, brightening before fading like a soft exhale. Strange things started happening after that. I'd find myself on the porch without remembering how I got there. Minutes would vanish from my watch with no explanation. Jenna mentioned feeling exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. I tried to convince myself it was just stress. One morning, I discovered something unusual in the woods near the house. A perfectly circular patch of bare ground, about 6 or 7 feet across, lay beneath the trees. No leaves, no pine needles, just flattened earth, as if something had pressed down with incredible force. Toby refused to go near the center, and we didn't dare touch it. The spot remained strange for days, slowly getting covered by fallen needles, but never quite looking normal. The beam continued to appear on subsequent nights, silent, distant, no shapes, no movement, no sounds. After about a week, it stopped abruptly, like someone had flipped a switch. Something wasn't right. The warm air during the beam's pulse, the time slips, Toby's behavior, none of it made sense. I've been fishing the northern Maine coast for almost 20 years. My name's Luke Mallory, and I run a small boat called the Night Gull. Lobster traps and occasional net fishing are my usual work. Nothing much changes out there, except the weather and the catch. Jenna and I still drive that road sometimes, searching for any sign. The woods feel quieter now, but attention lingers, like something's watching, waiting. I can't explain what happened. Maybe it was a trick of light or something else entirely. Whatever it wasn't normal. And I'm glad we never got closer. The water was freezing cold that morning in early March, with a wind that sliced through everything. I'd been out before dawn, doing my usual routine of checking traps and hauling nets. A thick fog hung low over the water, muffling sounds and creating an eerie atmosphere. My only goal was to bring in a decent catch and make the trip worthwhile. As the sun began to rise, I pulled up one of the nets from the previous day. Something felt different this time. The net was unusually heavy, as if snagged on something solid beneath the surface. Carefully, I lifted it, my gloves freezing from the dripping water. That's when I noticed something strange. Among the usual fish and kelp, a smooth triangular piece of metal caught my eye. It was unlike anything I'd seen before. No rust, no scratches, just a perfectly smooth surface. What struck me most was its temperature. Despite coming from freezing water, the metal felt warm to the touch. Murphy, my scrappy terrier mix, reacted oddly to the object. He perked up, sniffed the air, and then growled softly before staring intently, his head tilted in confusion. The metal was about the size of my hand, incredibly thin but rigid, with razor-sharp edges that looked machine-cut. Its dark gray surface had a subtle shimmer when the fog caught the light. I examined the object closely. No markings, no compartments, just a solid piece that seemed completely out of place. The more I handled it, the more puzzled I became. It remained warm and dry, defying all logic. I couldn't bring myself to throw it back into the water. As the fog began to lift and the day brightened, I made a decision. I wrapped the mysterious metal triangle in an old towel and tucked it away in the cabin, underneath my bunk. Something told me this wasn't just another ordinary day on the water. The day crawled by slowly, my eyes repeatedly drawn to the towel-wrapped object. Something about it felt off. It wasn't just random debris. That night, sleep was elusive. The boat creaked and the wind tapped against the windows, creating an unsettling backdrop. Beside my bunk, the towel sat on the small table, while Murphy paced restlessly, whining softly. When I finally unwrapped the metal, something had changed. Not its physical appearance, but an inexplicable warmth that seemed almost alive. Holding it in my palm, the air grew heavy. A faint humming just beyond hearing surrounded me. I quickly wrapped it back up, my mind spinning with questions about how such an object could have been tangled in my fishing net so deep in the ocean. The next morning, I took the mysterious item to Pete, a mechanic with an interest in coastal curiosities. In his brightly lit workshop, he examined the metal carefully. Using a screwdriver and magnet, he found no scratches, magnetic properties. "Looks like titanium," he said, "but unlike anything from a plane or ship." When I explained I'd found it near East Point, hundreds of feet underwater, Pete's frown deepened. Nothing usually surfaces from that depth, especially something this pristine. I left the metal with Pete for testing, but no one could identify its origin. Driving back to the boat, thick fog enveloped the landscape. My thoughts kept returning to the metal's strange warmth and unsettling silence. That night, Murphy began barking frantically at the cabin door. I opened it to find nothing, just darkness and the foggy sea stretching endlessly. The faint humming returned, pulsing softly beneath the waves. I was flying a charter flight over the Pacific, somewhere between San Diego and Honolulu. My name's Elena, and I've been a commercial pilot for just over 6 years. Nothing about my job surprises me much anymore. But this was one of those flights that stayed with me because it didn't make sense. The day started normal enough. Clear sky, some thin clouds way off in the distance, and calm ocean below. The sun was beginning to drop, casting long shadows across the water. turning the surface into a patchwork of deep blue and glittering gold. Back home, things had been strange since I found that piece of metal. I'd been carrying it around for a long time, feeling it press against my rare ibis, wondering if the metal was sending out some kind of signal. The following days were quieter. Pete called to say the metal didn't match any alloys in their database, and the scanner had picked up some odd electromagnetic readings, but nothing concrete. Meanwhile, the fog didn't seem to lift much, and every time I went out, I caught that faint hum. Murphy, my dog, stayed close, ears perked, never settling down. Then a few mornings after Pete's call, I was pulling in a net when I noticed the water near the boat ripple without wind. A dark shape passed underneath, big and slow, moving parallel to the boat, keeping pace like it was watching me. I froze. It wasn't a whale or any fish I knew. It was too big, and the shape was wrong, more angular than natural, like a shadow of something solid but unfamiliar. I tried to follow it with my eyes as it slipped beneath the boat and disappeared into the depths. The metal in the cabin felt warmer than ever that night, almost hot. I didn't touch it, just wrapped it up tight and locked it in a box I keep under the floorboards. After that, the hum stopped, and the fog lifted slowly over the next 2 days. I took the metal back to Pete, told him I wanted to get rid of it, but he said he'd hold on to it until he could figure out what it was. Since then, things have gone back to normal. Murphy's stopped barking at the cabin door, and the ocean looks like it always did. Cold, gray, and quiet. I don't know what that piece of metal was or why it was warm out there in freezing water. I don't know what the dark shape was beneath the boat that morning. All I know is that sometimes when the wind's just right, I swear I can still hear a faint hum coming off the water, like something waiting just out of sight. About an hour into the flight to Hawaii, something caught my eye through the plane's window. At first, I thought it was just a cloud's shadow, but its movement felt off. This was massive, far larger than any marine life I'd ever encountered. A dark shape glided steadily beneath the water's surface, moving alongside our aircraft. I called out to Mark, my co-pilot, who leaned over to look. He confirmed what I was seeing. This wasn't a boat. No wake, no typical marine vessel characteristics. The object matched our speed precisely, around 400 miles per hour at 35,000 feet. That's what made it so strange. Nothing of that size should maintain such perfect synchronization underwater. The shadow stretched approximately 150 to 200 feet long, but had no distinct form. Just a dark, shifting silhouette moving fluidly beneath the waves. I pointed it out to the passengers, a couple on vacation, who watched with fascination rather than fear. My exterior remained calm, but internally I felt unsettled. Something wasn't right. For 15 minutes, this mysterious shape tracked us perfectly. I tried using binoculars, but glare and distance prevented any clear view. I checked the radar and instruments repeatedly. Nothing registered. It felt like the ocean was concealing a profound secret just below its surface. As the sun lowered and the sky darkened, the passengers returned to their seats. Mark and I continued watching. Gradually, the shadow began to sink, disappearing without a trace. No sound, no surface disturbance, just a silent, precise tracking of our aircraft. After landing, I investigated with the control tower. No reports of unusual activity, military exercises, large boats, or drone flights along our route. The strangest revelation came when reviewing the cockpit video footage. I was out in the marsh again that morning. My name is Casey, and I do field research on migratory birds. Most of the time, it's just me, my gear, and the endless mess of wetland. My dog Juno, a lanky black and white border collie mix, sticks close by, her nose twitching in the damp air. That part of the marsh is way out there. No trails, no real landmarks, just a patchwork of pools, grass, and thick brush. I've been mapping bird activity around here for months. It's quiet mostly, except for one spot, a clearing maybe 20 by 30 feet, right in the middle of the marsh. I first noticed it a few weeks back because every time I scanned the sky, that clearing stood out. No birds flew over it, no nests in the branches around it, no bird calls or chirping. Even the insects seemed quieter there, which I found weird, but figured it was some natural quirk. Today, I decided to get a closer look. Juno was restless. She hates the muck, but she followed without complaint. The morning was cool and damp with thick fog sitting low over the marsh, muffling sound and giving everything a muted gray look. The air smelled of wet earth and decaying plants, that familiar sour sweetness. I moved slow, trying not to spook anything. As I got near the clearing, I noticed something else, no footprints. Not just animal tracks, but no sign of anything having been there recently. The ground was soft mud, but perfectly smooth except for a few tiny indentations I couldn't place. Too round for bird tracks, too small for deer or raccoons. Juno stopped beside me and stared. She didn't bark or whine, but her hackles were up. Later, when I reviewed my footage, something caught my eye outside. But when I played back the segment where the shadow was visible, the footage was glitchy. Parts were missing, and the shadow itself didn't show clearly, almost like the camera refused to record it properly. I showed the footage to a few pilot friends, but they just shrugged, said maybe it was a trick of the light or a sensor malfunction. But I know what I saw. I don't talk about it much because people tend to expect stories with flashing lights or dramatic chases. This was different. Quiet, slow, and just there. I still think about that dark shape pacing alongside us through miles of open ocean like it was watching or maybe waiting. And I wonder what else is out there beneath the waves, just out of sight. I was out in the marsh that day, tracking something unusual. Juno, my research partner, well, my dog, stopped cold and wouldn't budge. When I knelt down, I saw these strange marks in the ground, shallow, precise half-dollar-sized depressions scattered randomly through the mud. Something felt off immediately. The silence was unnatural. No bird calls, no rustling reeds, no distant croaks. The fog seemed thicker here, like the air itself was holding its breath. I started documenting everything, taking photos and notes, trying to stay calm. Just as I was packing up, a low, steady humming began. It wasn't from my equipment or any insect. The sound came from above the clearing, constant and impossible to pinpoint. Juno growled softly, tugging me back. My neck prickled as I scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. No shapes, no lights. The marsh looked completely normal, except for this one silent clearing. I tried convincing myself it was just some weird natural phenomenon, but my hands trembled slightly as I put away my camera. Juno kept staring, her head tilted, ears alert. By the time we reached the truck, the fog had lifted. The marsh was alive again. Bird songs, insects, the usual background noise. I checked my recordings. Nothing strange captured. Just a few shots of Juno sitting patiently. No evidence of those mud marks or the mysterious hum. I'm Caleb, 17, living in a quiet Idaho suburb. Pretty standard neighborhood, rows of houses, occasional trees. Just another late summer evening in my backyard when this whole thing started. When I told other researchers about the clearing, they didn't believe me. No tracks, no birds, no noise. They thought I was making it up or exaggerating. Maybe just a weird mud patch, they said. But I've been back twice since, always the same. The clearing stays quiet, those little mud marks remain, and sometimes that faint, untraceable humming returns. I can't explain it. It's not wildlife, not anything natural I've encountered before. Just a strange spot in the marsh that seems disconnected from everything around it. And somehow, that's what haunts me most. I was out on the patio swing that night, Birch dozing beside me. Around 11:30 p.m., the world was quiet except for distant cricket sounds and the occasional passing car. The sky stretched clear and dark above. Fiddling with my phone's camera app, I was playing with slow motion and zoom settings when something caught my eye. Up high, a tiny blinking light appeared. At first, I assumed it was a star or satellite. Then a jetliner came into view, heading east with its distinctive red and white taillights glowing. Nothing seemed unusual, until I noticed 3 strange lights moving alongside the plane. These lights were different. Smaller than the aircraft's navigation lights, they didn't blink like typical markers. Instead, they hovered in a tight, perfect triangular formation, shadowing the jetliner with an unnerving steadiness. Even as the plane banked and shifted altitude, these lights maintained their precise position. Immediately, I started recording. Zooming in carefully to keep the image clear, I watched the scene unfold. Birch stirred, ears perking up as if sensing something odd. For about a minute, I filmed silently, feeling a mix of fascination and unease. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the 3 lights vanished, completely. The jetliner continued its course unchanged, but the mysterious lights simply blinked out of existence. I replayed the video right away, confirming what I'd seen. Grainy but definitive footage of 3 lights trailing the plane. The next day, I tried to back up and share the video, but something strange happened. The file was gone. Not just deleted from my camera roll, but completely missing. I checked my phone, cloud storage, and laptop. Nowhere to be found. I was certain I hadn't accidentally erased it, but the video had disappeared without a trace. I'd been watching stars like I often did since my astronomy hobby began last summer. That night, just after 11 p.m., I was sitting in a folding chair in my backyard, a thermos of chamomile tea nearby. The sky was perfectly clear. Suddenly, 3 strange lights appeared, moving in perfect formation behind a distant jetliner. They followed the plane silently, then vanished without a trace. I managed to record the entire sequence on my phone, but when I tried to show anyone later, the video had completely disappeared. I tried every data recovery app I could find, but nothing worked. It was as if the file had never existed. The only evidence left was the screenshots I'd taken of the video frames. My parents dismissed my story when I mentioned it, suggesting it was probably a weather balloon or military test. Determined to capture more, I borrowed my friend Jamie's phone and tried recording the same area of sky. Nothing unusual showed up, just normal stars and distant planes. A few nights later, while outside with my dog Birch, I experienced something odd. The sky was cloudy, and around 11:30 p.m., I heard a faint rhythmic tapping from the trees at the yard's edge. Birch started growling, his fur standing on end. When I shone my flashlight toward the sound, I saw only shadows and leaves moving in the breeze. The tapping stopped abruptly. Strange occurrences began happening around the house. My phone's battery drained quickly, apps crashed randomly, and one evening, it froze on a black screen for 5 minutes before rebooting itself. When it came back on, the camera app was missing and had to be re-downloaded. I tried recording more nights, but the mysterious lights never reappeared. It felt like they existed only for that single moment. Birch has been acting differently since then, sometimes staring at the corner of the room as if watching something invisible. I've studied the screenshots countless times, wondering about their origin. Was it a trick of light, something man-made, or something else entirely? I can't be sure, but I know what I saw that night. 3 lights following a jetliner, steady and silent before vanishing without a trace. I was sitting outside, enjoying the quiet of my evening after retirement. The air carried a hint of autumn, crisp but not cold. Fitch, my wiry terrier cross, lay at my feet. Suddenly, something caught my eye above the treetops. At first I thought it might be a bird, but this was different. A small dark dot drifted silently across the sky, moving with an unnatural steadiness. It was about the size of a passenger jet, but incredibly low, maybe a quarter mile off the ground, and moving at walking pace. I grabbed my old binoculars. The object remained completely silent, smooth in its trajectory. No wings, no rotors, nothing explained its presence. It looked like a flattened sphere, though that could have been a trick of perception. I checked my phone's flight tracking apps. Nothing. The radio on the back porch offered only static. Fitch lifted her head and growled softly, then laid back down with her ears alert. A creeping dread settled over me. After 30 years as an air traffic controller, I knew something wasn't right. Unidentified objects don't just drift silently through the night. I walked across the grass for a clearer view. The object had moved about half a mile, maintaining a smooth arc without rising or falling. Moonlight barely outlined its blurry edge. I tried to steady the binoculars, but could make out no details, just a dark shape against the starry sky. Complete silence surrounded me. No wind, no sound except Fitch's subtle movements. I considered calling the airport tower where I used to work, but decided against it. The object was too small and slow to register, and would likely be gone by the time anyone investigated. Instead, I followed an old habit from my working days. I grabbed a notebook from the garage and documented everything. The time, 11:07 p.m., my position, estimated altitude, and drift path. The object took about 3 minutes to cross my field of view before disappearing behind the fir trees. I waited, but it never reappeared. I was sitting on the porch when something caught my eye in the sky. Fitch, my dog, wandered near the fence, her attention drawn to something unseen. I patted her head, trying to reassure both of us, but unease settled over me. Back in my chair, I stared at the empty space where the object had been. My mind churned through possibilities. Not a drone. Those make noise and require an operator. Not a weather balloon, which moves differently. Not a satellite, which travels much faster and stands out against the stars. This was something else. I sipped tea and drew on my training, forcing myself to stay calm and methodical. The ham radio from the porch table became my tool. I scanned frequencies, hearing local chatter about weather and traffic. No unusual reports, no mentions of unidentified objects. Inside, I grabbed yesterday's newspaper to note the date and checked local news. Nothing. No Skywatch alerts, no missing aircraft reports, no wildlife releases that might explain what I'd seen. The air grew colder when I stepped out again. The sky looked empty now, with no trace of movement. Fitch lay in the grass, drifting between sleep and wakefulness. I remained silent, absorbing the night's stillness. An hour passed. I turned off the porch light, plunging the yard into darkness. Strange how much I wanted to see that shape again, yet felt only confusion and a hint of fear. Inside, I locked the door. Fitch followed, nudging the floor beside me as I made more tea. The XT morning, online flight trackers showed nothing unusual, but a local mountain climbing forum held an intriguing detail. Someone near Eastern Ridge had spotted a slow-moving dot in the sky around 11 p.m. No photos, no additional description, just a matching timestamp. Fitch seemed perfectly normal, wagging her tail, hungry, playful. I tried distracting myself with yard work and errands, but my eyes kept drifting skyward. The afternoon TV weatherman confirmed excellent visibility and calm winds. Standard data revealed nothing out of the ordinary. At dinner, I shared the story with Jim, my neighbor and longtime private pilot. Something had definitely been out there. I just couldn't explain what. Last summer, around the second week of August, I was camping out on the deck every night with my telescope, hoping to catch the Percade meteor shower. My home is a quiet ranch house nestled in the back hills outside of Asheville, North Carolina. Clear skies and minimal light pollution make it perfect for stargazing. Astronomy has always been a hobby of mine. Nothing professional, just a backyard enthusiast. My setup is simple: a mid-range refractor scope, some star charts, and a phone app for identifying constellations. I've spent probably 200 nights on that deck, and I know the night sky above my house intimately. On August 13th, just after 11 p.m., something caught my eye. The meteors had slowed down, and I was casually scanning the sky when I spotted a tight cluster of 6 faint points of light just above the northeastern tree line. They were maybe magnitude 4 or 5, arranged like a crooked W, similar to Cassiopeia, but with an extra bend. My star app revealed nothing. No cataloged stars, no satellites, no aircraft markers. Curious, I sketched the formation in my notebook, labeling it Light Cluster NE 11:12 p.m. The next night, they appeared again, same time and place. When I described this to someone, he nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like some reflection or distant aircraft," he said, "but it wouldn't show up on radar." I showed him my notebook. He examined the times and drawn path, his tone polite but skeptical, saying it didn't match anything he'd flown. That night, I didn't watch the sky. I didn't want to wait for something I couldn't explain. Fitch, my dog, slept on her bed in the living room, head on her paws, eyes half-lidded. I offered her a scratch behind the ear, but she barely moved. I brushed my teeth and checked the window. Nothing. No shape, no lights, no humming, just darkness beyond the glass. I went to bed, planning to go about my day tomorrow, but I can't stop thinking of that shape. Drifting low, silent, with no radar trace, like something moving by rules I don't understand. That thought is harder to set aside than any sleepless night. So here we are. The notebook's on the shelf, Fitch is asleep, and out there above the trees, the sky remains clear and quiet. No answers yet. The first time I noticed something was off, the stars weren't quite where they should be. A slight shift, maybe 2 degrees to the west. I double-checked my sketches. Yep, they'd moved. Stars don't do that. Satellites move, planes move, but stars don't shift formation like this. I told my friend Melanie, who sometimes joins me stargazing. She laughed and joked about a UFO squadron. But I kept watching. Each night, the lights returned. Same shape, same glow, drifting westward, just barely out of sync with the surrounding stars, like they were circling or tracking something. By the fifth night, I felt watched. I know it sounds crazy. Standing in your backyard, looking up, you're exposed. But this felt different. Those 6 points of light seemed focused on me. I caught myself scanning the yard, half expecting something to be hiding in the darkness. I stopped, turning my back to the woods. On the seventh night, things got strange. I was adjusting my telescope, trying to capture a better view. While fiddling with my phone's camera settings, all 6 lights suddenly vanished. Not faded, not drifted, just gone. I stared at the empty, cloudless sky. 30 seconds later, they reappeared. Same formation, same dim glow, but shifted further west. 5, maybe 10 degrees. It felt intentional. For the first time in years, I cut my night short, didn't even pack up, just grabbed my scope and rushed inside. The next morning, I found weird muddy prints on the deck, not boot prints. These were bare, wide, with toes pointed slightly outward. They'd appeared after the dew, but before sunrise. I stopped going out on the deck after dark, but the lights kept showing up, visible through my bedroom window, just over the trees. Always that same crooked W, inching further west each time. I'd try anything to avoid looking. Music, closed blinds, complete distraction. But that feeling persisted, the tight chest sensation of being watched. By the third week, they were directly overhead. Telling anyone seemed impossible. Even Melanie would think I was crazy. But a recurring thought gnawed at me. What if this wasn't a constellation? What if my brain was just interpreting 6 separate lights as something familiar, when it was actually one single object? The possibility made me nauseous. Sleep became impossible. I'd wake at bizarre hours, 2:17, 3:03, 4:26, heart racing, staring blankly at the ceiling. Always aware those lights were out there, watching in their crooked formation. One night, I weakened. I cracked the blinds, just a sliver. They were lower now, visible between the treetops. That's when I noticed something else, a faint, glassy shimmer connecting the lights. I quickly shut the blinds. The baby monitor changed everything. Static erupted from the device, untouched for months, sitting on the hallway shelf. I watched, waited, then unplugged it and buried it in a drawer. By morning, new footprints appeared near the kitchen window. Close, too close. I needed to leave. No detailed explanations, just a vague request for a break. Melanie offered her guest room. I packed minimally, just a sleeping bag, leaving most belongings behind. Her house sat 20 minutes south in a more developed area. Brighter skies, no stargazing. Perfect. The first 2 nights, I slept deeply, almost normal. Then everything shifted. Returning from a grocery run around 9:30, Melanie driving, I glanced out the passenger window as we turned onto her street. There they were, low, hovering over a neighbor's house. Same crooked W, same pale shimmer. I said nothing, just stared. The first time I noticed the lights was about a month ago. I was out on my usual delivery route, working for a small courier company that handles mostly rural drop-offs. Medical supplies, documents, deliveries for folks who prefer to avoid Amazon trucks. Nothing exciting, just steady work. That Wednesday evening was clear and warm. The sun had just dipped below the hills, stretching long shadows across the landscape. I'd even snapped a photo of the sunset at a red light, thinking how nice it looked behind the grain silos. Around 7:40 p.m., I got a ping for a delivery on Tully Road, a route I knew well, running through open fields and scattered homes. The GPS showed coordinates about 5 miles past where the road typically ended. I figured maybe a new house had been built, something that happens often out here. Past the cattle guard at mile 12, the road narrowed to a single lane, barely maintained, but still paved. I turned down the radio, knowing how quiet that valley gets after sunset. Then things got strange. The GPS chirped, "Turn left," where there was nothing, no road, no gate, just a wire fence and an overgrown field that looked untouched for years. I slowed down, thinking I must have missed something. The GPS rerouted, sending me forward, then back, then forward again. I followed its loop twice, completely bewildered. Now the lights are always there. They didn't move then, and they don't move now. Dimmer than before, but still present. I catch glimpses in unexpected places, reflected in the pond across the road, flickering in my rearview mirror as I pull into the driveway. I stopped using my telescope, but I haven't stopped looking. I haven't stopped watching. The GPS rerouted me to the same empty field twice, both times at nearly the same spot. It was 7:58 p.m., and I thought the pin might be slightly off. I pulled over, turned on my flashers, and stepped out to investigate. The sun had almost vanished, leaving just a thin red line behind the distant hills. No buildings, no sounds, just the eerie beginning of insect chirps in the brush. When I reached the fence line and looked across the field, something felt different. The air was unnaturally still. Not just calm, but a thick, oppressive silence that seemed to press against my ears. No rustling, no distant cars, no cricket sounds. Scanning the landscape, I initially saw nothing extraordinary, just uneven ground and some old equipment half buried near the field's center. Then something caught my eye about 30 feet up near the property's far end. A metallic object, roughly the size of a van, hung perfectly motionless with no lights or movement. I tried rationalizing what I was seeing. A water tower, a drone, an agricultural survey balloon? But it wasn't connected to anything and remained absolutely stationary, as if frozen midair. I blinked, then stepped over the fence's bottom wire. The grass crackled brittle and dry under my boots. As I walked, I kept my eyes fixed on the object, unchanged, silent. About 20 yards in, my phone buzzed sharply in my pocket. The GPS screen spun wildly before freezing, and my battery plummeted from 78% to 14% in seconds. Then the screen glitched and went black. Something felt wrong. The van now seemed farther away than it should have been. The ground beneath my feet felt strange, not soft or wet, just fundamentally different. When I crouched and touched the weeds, they were stiff and wouldn't bend, instead snapping cleanly at the base when I pinched them. I wasn't scared, exactly. Just deeply unsettled. My stomach churned like after a sudden elevator stop. Glancing up, the object remained unchanged, a silent, motionless anomaly in the twilight. The air around me felt strange. A faint shimmer danced along the edges like heat waves on a cool day. I stood motionless, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Minutes passed, but nothing moved. Fitch's bark broke the silence. My border collie mix, usually calm and sharp, wasn't by the van anymore. He stood halfway between me and the fence, ears pinned back, hackles raised, another sharp, anxious bark, and he started backing away with his tail tucked. When I stepped toward him, the air changed. A low hum vibrated in my chest, barely audible like a distant idling engine. I glanced back at the object, and it was gone, completely vanished. No noise, no trail, no blur. 1 second it existed, the next it didn't. My body tensed. The field returned to empty silence. Fitch whined softly. I walked back to the van, scanning the sky, finding nothing. My phone was dead. The delivery scanner had rebooted, showing a blank home screen. The earlier address had disappeared. I locked the doors, started the engine. Everything felt sluggish, turning the key, shifting gears, making a U-turn. Mirrors constantly checked. I drove toward the main road. About 2 miles out, near the cattle guard, the GPS suddenly came back online. My battery jumped to 67% in seconds. Route history showed previous stops, but no trace of that field's delivery point. The next day, I couldn't find the order in the system. My manager dismissed my story, mentioning upload issues. Since then, I've accidentally passed through that area a few times. Just coincidence, I tell myself. The bedroom's brightness woke me around 3:30 in the morning. A pale bluish light spilled from the hallway, not from any lamp. I thought maybe the kitchen light was on, or the fridge door hadn't closed properly. Barefoot and groggy, I wandered out to check. My dog Trina, usually alert to every sound, didn't move. That should have been my first hint something was strange. The light wasn't from the kitchen, but the living room, flickering like a screen. The TV was on, which made no sense since I hadn't used it all day. I work on my laptop in the evenings and keep the remote on the mantle to stop Trina from sitting on it. Standing in the living room, I stared at the TV screen. A silent video of the sky played, cloudy, pinkish blue, like the moments before a storm. It panned slowly, drone-like, looping every half minute. At first, I thought it was a screensaver, but then I realized it was my backyard. The video moved from just above the trees at my property's edge, approaching the house. I recognized the shed roof, the back fence, the maple tree leaning slightly right. No sound accompanied the steady, slow pan across the sky and down toward the yard. I tried turning off the TV. Nothing worked. Remote, inputs, unplugging, power button, all useless. The video continued its endless loop. A faint ding from the kitchen drew me away. My laptop was open, something I never do. The same video played on its screen, the tab simply titled Untitled with no URL. I still have the sunset photo on my phone from Tully Road, timestamped 7:32 p.m. It's my only proof of being out there that night. Fitch won't go near the passenger side door after 6 p.m. The field where I remember everything has vanished, replaced by pine trees and a narrow creek bed. No open land, no wire fence remains. My laptop was open with a video playing. I shut the lid, but a second later, it dinged and started playing again. Then my phone buzzed on the counter. When I picked it up, the lock screen showed the same video in the background. I hadn't touched anything or changed any settings. Something felt off. I went to the bedroom, where Trina was sleeping soundly on her side, breathing slowly. I called her name a few times, but she only blinked and didn't wake up. Her body was warm, but she seemed deeply unconscious, almost like she was under anesthesia. The hallway light flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. Back in the main room, I noticed all three screens, TV, laptop, and phone, were perfectly synchronized. Same shot, same movement, same loop. Suddenly, the video froze on a single frame. There was something in the sky, not exactly a shape, but a dark, unmoving spot. Clouds drifted around this fixed black area near the center of the image. I tried to take a picture, but my phone's camera wouldn't respond. Stepping out onto the porch, I found an eerie silence. No wind, no insects, no night sounds. Even the crickets were quiet. The sky looked cloudy, with a pale pinkish-blue glow from distant city lights. I couldn't see the dark patch with my own eyes, but the air felt strange, like a pressure shift before a storm, except it wasn't cold. After a few minutes of complete stillness, the porch light went out. Unnerved, I went back inside and tried everything to stop it. I shut off the power, unplugged the router, turned off my phone, and removed the laptop battery. Nothing worked. The screens would go black for a second, then flick back on, showing the same frozen backyard sky with that unmoving dark spot. At some point, I even tried recording it with my old DSLR. My camera was acting strange, but I kept watching TV, losing track of time. Around 5:12 a.m., all the screens suddenly went black without warning. The kitchen lights flickered on, the heater hummed to life, and Trina wandered into the hallway, stretching and wagging her tail as if nothing unusual had happened. I checked my phone and laptop. Everything seemed perfectly normal. No altered settings, no changed wallpapers, no unusual history. The battery was full, and Chrome showed no open tabs. When I turned the TV back on, it displayed the standard home screen. Before sunrise, I went out to the backyard. Everything looked exactly the same. No disturbed ground, no broken branches, no marks. One thing was different, though. The shed door stood wide open, untouched for weeks. This was meant to be a standard tower maintenance run. A 20-meter line through eastern Washington's dry, rocky terrain, a route I knew well. It was a clear, scorching mid-July day with not a single cloud overhead. I'd parked near Tower 19, a massive structure requiring a steep hike from the service road. My usual gear was with me: harness, gloves, helmet, radio. I'd done hundreds of climbs just like this. Something felt off immediately, an unnatural silence. No wind, no insect sounds. The heat should have triggered cicadas, but everything was eerily still. Clipping in, I started the ascent. About 140 feet to the top platform, I'd long since mastered the rhythm: clip, step, grip, rest, repeat. Halfway up, I paused to wipe sweat away and noticed something bizarre. Someone was already on the maintenance platform, standing motionless about 10 feet below the highest point. No gear, no harness, no helmet. At first, I assumed it might be another worker, perhaps from a night shift. But we never work without coordination, and no other vehicles were around. I called out. Nothing. No response, no movement. Just standing there, arms at their sides. I was climbing Tower 19, part of my routine maintenance check, when something strange happened. As I made my way up, I noticed a figure standing on the narrow platform. The space is barely 3 feet wide, with cross beams running through it, making it difficult to stand comfortably without securing yourself. But this figure seemed completely at ease, as if standing on solid ground. I radioed base to confirm if anyone had been dispatched to this section earlier. After some static, they responded with a clear negative. I was the only one assigned here today. My attention kept returning to the figure. Something felt off. I continued climbing, watching them carefully. In a moment that still doesn't make sense to me, I blinked, just a normal, quick blink, and suddenly they were gone. Completely vanished. No sound, no movement. I froze about 20 feet from where they had been, my heart racing. There was absolutely nowhere they could have disappeared to. No ladder above, no gaps to drop through, no ropes, nothing. I stayed still for several minutes before forcing myself to continue to the top platform. I needed to understand what was happening. But the platform was empty. I checked every angle, every beam. Nothing. What struck me most was a strange smell. Not unpleasant, but distinctly odd. It was metallic like hot pennies, sharp and subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. The smell faded quickly. By the time I finished my work, tightening insulators and checking connections, it had completely disappeared. I climbed down faster than usual and did a walk around to calm my nerves. The ground was loose and dry, easily showing tracks, but I could only see my own trail in and out. I decided to skip the next tower for the day. While driving out, I glanced back at Tower 19. Nothing seemed unusual. But then my radio, which had been silent since my earlier communication with base, suddenly crackled with static. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. My name, clear as day, spoken from behind me. I slammed on the brakes and looked around. Nothing but dry hills surrounded me. I checked the back of my truck. Empty. I waited, engine running, but no more voices came. Back at the station, I wrote my maintenance report as if nothing had happened. I assumed it was just heat exhaustion or my imagination playing tricks. But that night, sitting on my porch outside Spokane, something else occurred. I was out in the yard late one night, sipping a soda and stargazing, when suddenly all the outside lights went dark. Not from a power outage, just my yard. Inside, everything worked fine. Switches, lights, appliances, all normal. Back outside, the yard remained pitch black. A faint orange glow caught my eye near the tree line. It wasn't fire, but a soft, shifting light that seemed to move behind the trees. I watched for about half a minute as it slowly faded, almost like sinking into the ground. By morning, the motion sensor lights were back to normal. Checking the area later, I found something odd. A 6-foot strip of grass completely flattened. Not burned or torn up, just pressed flat as if something heavy had rested there. No tire tracks, no footprints. My neighbor Alma stopped by that afternoon. She asked if I'd been outside late, mentioning her dog Henry had been barking toward my property around 10, continuing for over an hour. I played it cool, suggesting maybe a coyote was around. I've returned to Tower 19 many times since then. Never saw that strange figure again. But occasionally, halfway up, I catch a brief whiff of hot metal. Last Saturday, I took my drone out to Millbridge just after 6 p.m. The weather was perfect, clear skies, light wind, that pleasant late spring warmth before the bugs become a nuisance. I hadn't flown since fall, and the open fields around Millbridge Creek were ideal. No trees or houses to worry about, just grass, old fences, and a few rickety sheds. I parked by the gravel pull-off near the cattle gate and set up next to my car's hood. The sun was low but still bright. Faint sounds of the creek and distant truck traffic created a peaceful backdrop. My DJI Mini 3 Pro wasn't anything special, but it had decent range and video capabilities. I'd charged it the night before, updated the firmware, and even brought a polarized lens for the camera. Launching to about 150 feet, I started panning east toward the tree line, mostly birch and cottonwood, running along a rough lowland near the old fire road. I was out flying my drone when something strange happened. I'd explored this area before and found an old ATV half buried last year. Nothing unusual, just abandoned junk people leave behind. About 15 minutes into the flight, the video feed did something odd. It wasn't a signal drop, just a brief stutter, a quick freeze for maybe half a second before resuming. I wasn't far out, maybe 800 feet with a clear line of sight, so I assumed it was just minor interference or a quirky controller. As I started bringing the drone back, something unexpected occurred. The gimbal suddenly jerked hard left without any input from me, like an invisible hand had nudged it mid-flight. It recovered quickly, but then the altitude began dropping. First slowly, then faster. I tried fighting it, pushing the stick up, hitting the return to home button, but nothing changed. The signal remained green, battery above 60%, no obstacle warnings, yet the drone kept drifting toward the tree line. Then it stopped. Completely still, hovering about 20 feet above ground between two cottonwood trees. The video feed continued, showing trees swaying slightly. But the drone itself was motionless. No controls worked. Yaw, pitch, throttle. Nothing responded. Gradually, it began descending again. Not a sudden drop, but a smooth, controlled vertical movement, almost like being lowered by an unseen crane. Then, abruptly, the screen went black. Not static, not signal loss, just a clean, sharp cut. Confused, I waited a moment, thinking maybe it had landed or crashed. I walked into the field, using GPS coordinates to guide me through the brush. It took nearly 40 minutes to locate the drone. There it sat, perfectly upright in a patch of flattened weeds. No damage anywhere, propellers intact, legs unbent, camera lens spotless. When I picked it up, something felt off. The body was warm, warmer than it should have been after sitting powered off. Not hot, just unexpectedly warm. I powered it on. Everything seemed normal, standard boot up, lights flashing correctly. I manually flew it a few feet to check stability. It hovered perfectly. Satisfied, I packed it up and headed home. Later, I connected it to my laptop to review the footage. Up to a certain point, everything looked completely ordinary. The drone video played back exactly as I remembered. A slight camera stutter, then a leftward jolt. It began its slow descent, hovering perfectly stable between the trees. Around 19 seconds before the cutoff, something strange happened. The gimbal tilted down more than it should have, and I hadn't touched anything. The camera angle shifted just enough to reveal the undercarriage, landing gear, and legs. In those few frames, something bizarre occurred. A circular patch of grass, about 2 feet wide, started bending outward, as if an invisible weight was pressing down. No hands, no branches, no animals, just plants moving as something heavy and unseen descended with the drone. The descent became unnaturally smooth, not like a crash, but more like a carefully controlled platform being lowered by cables. When it touched down, there was no bounce or twitch, just a perfect, complete stop. Then the lens began to darken. Not a hard cut, but a soft fade from left to right. No shapes crossed the frame, no fingers, just a gradual dimming, like a curtain slowly closing. The file ended after 3 minutes and 41 seconds. I pulled the telemetry data next. The GPS showed a steady descent from 150 feet to ground level in just under 40 seconds. Battery voltage remained constant. But here's the weird part. The logs showed zero input from the controller during this entire time. No stick movements, no button presses, as if the drone was in free fall or completely controlled by something else. I showed the video to my drone photographer friend Kate. She couldn't understand how I'd lowered it. When I insisted there was no line, she thought I was joking. I even showed her the drone. No hooks, no attachments, no damage. She ran a firmware diagnostic, and everything came back clean. Now the drone sits in my office, packed in its case with the same SD card. I've watched the footage countless times. There's nothing obviously wrong. No glitches, no strange pixelation, just an inexplicable sequence of events. I was driving back from my cousin Reed's place in Lawrence, heading west on Route 94 toward Heaton. The night was deep, past midnight, and I was about 40 minutes from home. This stretch between Clay Hill and the old grain elevators is nothing but flat farmland, some irrigation rigs, maybe a barn every couple miles, just dark, open fields. I wasn't tired, exactly. More like that wired kind of quiet you get after a long visit. Windows cracked, radio low. Not much traffic out there at that hour. In fact, I hadn't passed another car in at least 15 minutes. I had just passed the busted sign for Leach's Feed and Seed when something caught my eye up ahead. A soft white light, maybe the size of a basketball, was hovering right in the center of the road. At first, I thought it was a reflector or some weird glare. But there were no signs, and it wasn't reflecting my headlights. This thing had its own glow, pure white, steady and soft, like a bulb seen through frosted glass. Not bluish like a phone screen or yellow like a lamp. Just white. I slowed down, easing off the gas, not slamming the brakes. The light didn't move. As I got within 50 yards, it remained completely still, hovering at about chest height. Then when I was maybe 20 yards away, it began to fade. Not a blink or a sudden disappearance, but a gradual dispersal like mist in sunlight, simply ceasing to be visible. By the time I reached the spot, it was gone. I stopped the car in the middle of the road, hazards on. Stepping out, I was met with an eerie silence. Not even crickets. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring a little. I scanned around with my phone's flashlight, checking the ditches and overhead. Nothing. Just the smell of alfalfa and road dust. Back in the car, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe swamp gas or distant combine headlights, though there wasn't a single vehicle or house light anywhere around. I even turned off my headlights briefly to see if anything changed, a decision I immediately regretted. The moment the lights went out, it felt like the entire world had vanished. Only the faint glow of the dashboard remained, surrounded by pitch-black darkness. I was driving late at night, the road stretching out before me in the darkness. Something caught my eye as I passed Jacoby Lane, a stop sign that seemed out of place. I'd driven this route countless times before, but this sign was brand new, perfectly clean, with fresh gravel around its base and no hint of rust. I reversed and got out to take a closer look. The road beyond was pitch black, with no visible driveways or lights. There was absolutely no reason for a stop sign here, no cross traffic, no intersections. The road simply ended about half a mile down. I snapped a picture with my phone, the flash briefly illuminating the surrounding fields. For a split second, I thought I saw something move in the ditch, a shape shifting slightly, but when I scanned the area, nothing was there. Back in the car, I continued driving. Soon I noticed my music had stopped. The Bluetooth was still connected, but nothing was playing. I tried to restart it, but the screen was frozen. It rebooted silently, without the usual sounds. Then I realized the GPS was also stuck. My blue arrow frozen in place, no distance updates, no turn instructions. I pulled over near a drainage culvert, engine running. My phone showed full bars, but the Maps app wouldn't load. It spun briefly before showing a blank white screen. The clock read 12:47 a.m. I sat there on the shoulder, surrounded by dark corn and soybean fields, feeling completely isolated. Suddenly, a soft white glow began rising from the field to my left. It wasn't a spotlight, but an ambient light that slowly increased in intensity, like a dimmer switch being turned up. No sound accompanied this strange illumination. The silence was absolute, broken only by the quiet hum of my idling engine. I live out in the country about 10 miles west of Ashland, Oregon, where it's mostly quiet. My small, older house sits with a big porch facing west, overlooking a line of fir trees and a clearing where my dog Luna loves to run. I moved here a couple years ago to escape city noise and enjoy some peace. About 3 months after settling in, something strange began to happen. One night, after staying up late watching old movies, I went to bed with Luna already curled up at my feet. Around 2:13 a.m., I jolted awake to a deep, low humming noise. This wasn't like a typical mechanical sound from a fan or appliance. It was a continuous, vibrating drone that seemed to come from just outside. I peered out the window, but saw nothing. Then, during another late-night drive, everything got even weirder. I was on Jacoby Lane when a strange light caught my attention. It wasn't coming from above, but from behind a ridge in the field, as if something just out of sight was shining toward the crops. Instinctively, I killed the headlights and dead silence surrounded me, not even a whisper of wind. I sat motionless for a full minute. The light slowly dimmed and then vanished completely. When I started the car again, the dash clock read 12:39, 8 minutes earlier than when I'd first stopped. My engine had been running initially, but now the entire car had shut off and the clock had rolled backward. I drove home without further incident. Upon arriving, I discovered the photo I'd taken of a stop sign had mysteriously disappeared from my phone. The next morning, I returned to that stretch of road. No stop sign stood there, just an old leaning post. Where I'd first seen the hovering light, a faint circular smudge marked the asphalt, about basketball-sized, pale gray, almost as if the pavement had been bleached. I couldn't explain what had happened. The experience left me unsettled, wondering about the strange light, the time discrepancy, and the vanishing stop sign. Something unexplained had occurred that night on Jacoby Lane. I stepped onto the porch, coat and flashlight in hand. The night was silent, stars blazing overhead. No sounds of planes or helicopters, no flashing lights anywhere. My flashlight swept across the clearing, trees, and driveway, revealing nothing but familiar shadows in the forest's darkness. The humming had stopped precisely at 2:17 a.m., leaving behind an eerie stillness. I tried to rationalize it as a distant generator from a neighbor, but that didn't make sense. The nearest house was half a mile away through the trees, and I knew of no nearby properties that could produce such a sound. The pattern repeated the next night. At 2:13 a.m., a low, pulsing hum began, causing the windows to vibrate slightly. Outside, nothing was visible, just a strange vibration in the air. I walked the property's edge, checking the barn and sheds, but found no source. Over the following weeks, the phenomenon continued nightly. Always the same, starting quietly, building to a steady drone, then fading after 4 minutes. Luna remained calm, which suggested it wasn't an animal-related disturbance. About a week in, I decided to record the sound. The audio was peculiar, with a rhythmic quality that seemed to pulse in waves. When I played it back, it sounded like a mechanical drone. I shared it with friends in town, but no one recognized the noise. Other strange occurrences began to emerge. Luna would sometimes wake me, staring intently out the window at the trees, her body tense. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of quick light flashes through the pine trees, likely just shadows or distant car lights, but unsettling nonetheless. Some mornings I discovered small patches of crushed grass in the clearing. These flattened circles, 2 or 3 feet across, showed no signs of vehicles or footprints. I wondered if they might be from a bird or deer, but something felt off about their precise, uniform appearance. The humming started again at exactly 2:13, just like every other night. I was sitting on the porch with Luna, watching the clearing and the trees. Something felt different this evening. The air seemed thicker, heavier somehow, and the wind had completely stopped, which was unusual after the gentle breeze earlier. About halfway through the hum, a faint glow caught my eye. Behind the tallest fir tree at the clearing's edge, a soft, bluish shimmer flickered. It wasn't like a flashlight or any normal light, more of a floating, ethereal glow that lasted maybe 5 seconds before vanishing. I blinked, and it was gone. The next day, I investigated the spot where I'd seen the light. The ground looked normal, just dirt, needles, and crushed grass. But I discovered something odd. Tiny, almost invisible indentations in the soil, arranged in an unnatural pattern, each smaller than a fingernail. I showed these to a longtime neighbor, but he dismissed it, saying the forest creates strange shapes sometimes. Still, something didn't feel right. The humming continued nightly for weeks, sometimes seeming to hover right over the house, other times drifting toward the woods. I'd try to track its source, but it always fell silent before I could locate it. One cold September night, Luna started growling quietly at something behind the house. I checked, but found only dark trees and thick brush. That's when I began to feel watched, not just by Luna, but by something unseen. Whether sitting on the porch or inside near the windows, a prickling sensation told me eyes were focused on me, even though nothing was visible. On the final night, I decided to stay awake past the humming. I kept the porch light low, Luna beside me, watching the clearing and wood's edge. Right on schedule, at 2:13, the familiar hum began. The night started out like any other late summer evening. I'm Caleb, 17, living in a quiet Idaho suburb with regular streets and rows of houses. My backyard was nothing special, just the occasional tree breaking up the monotony. I often mess around with my phone, filming random clips, usually just my dog Birch chasing squirrels or other silly moments. That night, around 11:30 p.m., I was sitting on the patio swing with Birch snoozing beside me. The sky was clear, with only crickets and distant car sounds breaking the silence. While playing with my phone's camera app, testing slow motion and zoom features, I noticed a tiny blinking light high up. At first, I assumed it was a star or satellite. Then I spotted a jetliner heading east, its red and white taillights glowing. Moments later, something unusual caught my eye. 3 faint, dim lights moving in formation near the plane. Unlike standard aircraft navigation lights, these were different, smaller, steadier, almost like they were shadowing the jetliner. I immediately grabbed my phone and started recording, zooming in carefully to maintain image clarity. The lights remained in a tight, perfectly aligned triangular shape, moving with an unnerving consistency alongside the jet. Then, things got strange. A soft vibration began in my chest, barely perceptible at first. The porch light flickered briefly, and suddenly the wind went completely still. At the edge of the trees, a shape began to move. Dark and almost camouflaged, it was unlike any animal I recognized. Too tall, with a slow, deliberate movement that suggested it was watching me as intently as I was watching it. Before I could focus completely, it slipped behind the tree line and vanished. The humming stopped, and normal night sounds gradually returned. Sleep was impossible that night. The next morning, I checked the clearing and found the grass flattened, with those same tiny indentations in the dirt. A few days later, I stayed with a friend in town. Luna seemed calmer during those nights, and while I never heard the humming again, sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear that low drone, waiting. I kept filming the plane as it banked slightly and changed altitude, watching the whole thing silently. Something felt off, and I was on edge. Birch woke up and looked up too, ears perked. Suddenly, the jetliner's 3 lights blinked out, vanishing without a trace. The plane continued its path as if nothing had happened. I stopped recording and immediately played back the video. Despite the grainy quality, the footage clearly showed the 3 lights trailing the aircraft. I zoomed in and took screenshots, thinking, this is pretty wild. The next day, I attempted to upload the video to cloud storage and share it with friends interested in planes and astronomy. But when I went to find the files on my phone, they had completely disappeared. Not just from my camera roll, but from everywhere. I checked the cloud storage. Nothing. Thinking I might have accidentally deleted it, I checked my laptop where I'd transferred photos the night before. Still no luck. Data recovery apps yielded no results. It was as if the video had never existed on any device. Strangely, the screenshots I'd taken remained intact, but the original video was gone. I cautiously asked my parents if they'd seen anything unusual in the sky recently. They laughed it off, suggesting it was probably my imagination or a weather balloon. I kept the mysterious video disappearance to myself. Later that week, I borrowed my friend Jamie's phone and tried recording the same area of night sky. Nothing unusual appeared, just normal stars and distant planes. A few nights later, I was outside with Birch on a cloudy evening. Around 11:30 p.m., a faint rhythmic tapping sound came from the trees at the yard's edge. Birch began growling, his fur standing on end. I shone a flashlight toward the sound, but saw only shadows and leaves moving in the breeze. The tapping stopped abruptly, and I didn't stay out much longer. After these incidents, strange things started happening around the house. My phone's battery would drain rapidly, even with minimal use, and apps began behaving oddly. I launched the balloon just after 11 a.m. on a crisp, clear Saturday in late September with barely any wind. Our amateur science group in Marlow, just 4 of us, me, Neil, Chell, and Gabe, doesn't have much to do in our small town. So we started launching weather balloons with a GoPro rig and GPS tracker a couple years back. Cheap thrills. We'd send it up, get some footage, chase it down, and grab burgers afterward. That morning, we met behind the high school like always. We filled the balloon with helium from Missoula, secured the payload box, turned on the GoPro, triple-checked the GPS beacon, and let it go. The launch was smooth. We all stood around shielding our eyes, watching it shrink to a white dot before vanishing into the blue. Everything was normal until about 90 minutes in. We were tracking the GPS on Neil's tablet, expecting it to come down east of Clearwater Ridge. But around noon, the dot jumped nearly 8 miles north. No gradual drift, just pop. 1 second it was above the ridge, the next over a part of the woods we never see balloons land in. We figured the tracker bugged out or caught a weird gust. We've had strange paths before, but this one didn't make sense. We piled into Gabe's Subaru and started heading toward the new coordinates. The signal held steady, no bouncing. It led us past Old Route 3 and into a patch of woods. My phone would crash randomly. One evening, it froze on a completely black screen for about 5 minutes, then rebooted by itself. When it came back on, the camera app was missing from the home screen. I had to download it again from the App Store. I tried recording a few more nights after that, but the strange lights never appeared again. It felt like they were only there that one night. then gone. I still don't know what those 3 lights were, or why the video disappeared from every device I saved it on. Birch has been acting a little jumpy ever since. He sometimes stares at the corner of the room for no reason, like he's watching something I can't see. I've kept the screenshots and rewatched them countless times, trying to figure it out. Maybe it was a trick of the light, maybe something man-made, or maybe something else entirely. But I know what I saw that night. Those 3 lights following that jetliner, steady and silent until they vanished without a trace. We were in a remote forest, far from any beaten path. No trail markers, no signs of human activity, just an old, barely passable logging road. We eventually had to abandon the vehicle and continue on foot. After hiking for about 45 minutes, we discovered our target. A torn balloon hung in a pine tree, roughly 30 feet up, while the payload box rested on a bed of moss below. Everything appeared untouched, no burn marks, no signs of impact. We collected the equipment and made our way back. That evening, Neil transferred the footage to his laptop, and we gathered in his living room, pizza in hand, waiting for the download. Initially, the video was exactly as expected. Launch footage showed the camera tilting upward, panning over the town, fields, and mountains. The sun hung high, with a few wispy clouds drifting by. As it pushed through the stratosphere, the blue sky faded to black. Beautiful imagery. Typically, descent footage shows some turbulence and the balloons burst, but this recording was different. Around 1 hour and 48 minutes in, the picture abruptly cut to static, then suddenly revealed a startling image. Stars. Dozens of them, bright and crisp, as if captured directly from space. But something was off. There was no Earth, no atmospheric curve, no clouds, just a black sky filled with sharp, brilliant stars. The timestamp read 12:37 p.m., full daylight. 40 seconds of motionless starscape followed, completely silent. We later confirmed our GoPro didn't record audio, though we doubted it would have captured anything unusual. The footage then cut back to static for another 20 seconds before ending. Neil suggested the GPS might have delayed and appended night footage, but we ruled that out. The metadata showed a single continuous file with no edits. We ran video recovery tools, which yielded the same result. Chell stepped out to smoke and returned with an observation. Had we noticed the strange smell? We hadn't, but once she mentioned it, we did. A faint, acrid scent reminiscent of melted plastic, but somehow colder. The smell emanated from the payload box. Neil reopened the box. The GoPro was still warm, not entirely unusual as they can heat up. However, a thin layer of condensation lined the foam interior, which made no sense. It hadn't rained, and the outside air was dry. We were ice fishing on Maplehead Lake, about 20 minutes west of Iron River, Michigan. It was the first week of January, cold enough for thick ice, but not much snow had accumulated yet. Clear skies, no wind, just cold and quiet. My son Connor had just turned 12, and I was trying to make these weekend trips a regular thing, just the two of us. My dad used to take me out on this same lake when I was around Connor's age, so I wanted to pass on the tradition. We'd been out there since around 5 p.m., fully equipped with the auger, a small propane heater, and a thermos of hot chocolate. This wasn't an overnight trip, just an evening outing. The sun disappeared behind the trees around 4:45, and by 6, it was dark enough that we needed our headlamps. Connor was sitting on an overturned bucket next to one of the fishing holes, fiddling with his line. I had just lit a second propane canister when something caught my attention. Later, when we were reviewing the footage, something strange became apparent. The temperature should have frozen everything, but it wasn't ice, just damp. After our trip, Gabe left early, and Chell stayed maybe 15 more minutes before heading out. I remained with Neil a bit longer, helping him review the footage. Around 10:30, while we were sitting there, his lights flickered once. Then his phone buzzed. When he checked it, he frowned. No bars. My phone showed the same, no service. This almost never happens in town, maybe only during a heavy storm, but this was a calm, clear night. I left shortly after, constantly thinking about the star footage. The frame never wobbled. The stars didn't shift at all. No spin, nothing. It was like the camera was perfectly still, pointed at a fake sky. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from Neil. When I called back, he told me the GoPro wouldn't turn on anymore, completely dead. He tried charging it, switching cables, even opening the casing. Nothing. The SD card still worked, but the camera was toast. We met up that afternoon. Neil wanted to try launching again to test the equipment, maybe next weekend. I agreed, but we never got around to it. Chell didn't respond to our texts for a couple of days. When she finally did, she said she'd rather not do another balloon for a while. We never posted the video, didn't show anyone else. Neil still has the original file, and I have a copy. Every now and then, I pull it up and skip to those last 40 seconds. Just stars. Too many of them. Way too many for where we were. The frozen lake stretched out before us, silent and still. An amber glow caught my eye, drifting smoothly across the ice. It wasn't like any snowmobile headlight I'd seen before. Too steady, too quiet. Low in the sky, maybe 200 feet up or less, the light moved with an eerie precision. Connor and I both froze, watching. The object glided over the ice as if pulled by an invisible string. No blinking lights, no engine noise. Its shape was hard to define, roughly oval, wider at the front and tapering slightly at the back. The color reminded me of a dim street lamp's glow, not bright, but distinctly orange. As it passed directly overhead, Connor whispered, "What is that?" I had no answer. We stood there in the middle of the lake, our fishing holes open between us, feeling like we were being scanned by something otherworldly. Suddenly, it stopped. Not a gradual slowdown, but an instant halt, as if hitting an invisible barrier right in the lake's center. Hovering silently, it continued its dull amber illumination. That's when strange things started happening. The heater sputtered out, though there was no wind. Connor's fishing line went slack. His bobber still floated, but something felt fundamentally wrong. We waited, time seeming to stretch. Then the glow began to fade, not all at once, but gradually, like someone slowly turning down a dimmer switch. The object's edges blurred into darkness and then vanished completely. We packed up quietly, walking back to the truck. I kept watching the tree line, alert for any movement. Connor asked about returning the next morning to check our gear. I agreed, partly to satisfy my own curiosity about what we just experienced. When we returned around 10 a.m., the morning was bright and clear. Our previous night's tracks remained, and our equipment was exactly where we'd left it. But something about the ice felt different. Not visibly changed, yet distinctly strange. Not slippery, but somehow altered. The ice looked tacky, almost like it had been melted and refrozen unevenly. 4 shallow rings marked where something had stopped, pressing into the snow. Connor and I approached the closest tip-up. It hadn't tripped, but when he reeled it in, the hook was bare. Curious, I drilled a new hole and dropped the line. Nothing. No nibble. I tried again 10 feet over, still nothing. Then something dark caught my eye beneath the ice near where I was kneeling. At first it looked like a shadow, but when I cleared the snow, I saw it clearly. A fish. No, dozens of fish, suspended just under the ice, motionless and dead. They weren't frozen like during a typical winter kill. Their bodies were intact, eyes clear, unmarked, as if they'd all stopped swimming simultaneously. Connor saw them too, his face already pale. We walked another 100 feet toward the center. More holes, more fish. No trauma, no oxygen bubbles, no blood. Just a silent, frozen mass of lifeless fish stretching as far as we could see through the ice. We didn't stay long. I told Connor we'd pack it in and return another day. He didn't argue. We loaded the gear in the truck and drove home in silence. That night, I sat on the porch with a beer, watching the woods. Nothing moved. No glow, just cold and quiet. The next morning, I called Denny Blake at the bait shop near the trailhead. I mentioned the dead fish, suggesting he might want to warn others. He said a few people had reported similar things. Empty holes, weird patches under the ice. Nobody mentioned the light. Neither did I. We haven't been back since. It was early June, late afternoon, in the hills behind my place in Northern California. The kind of spot where neighborhoods give way to wilderness. The trails were still green, not yet dusty. Soft, golden sunlight spilled over rolling hills. Perfect weather, warm but not hot, with a breeze just cool enough to prevent things from feeling sticky. I usually run a loop winding through open fields and oak patches. The trail was quiet, winding through Manzanita with barely anyone around. I was running, enjoying the peaceful landscape and focusing on my breathing and footsteps. Halfway up the ridge, with a clear view of the valley below, something caught my eye. What I saw looked at first like an animal nest, or maybe a fire pit. But as I studied it, the scene grew increasingly strange. A perfect circle of dead grass sat in the middle of an otherwise lush green field. Inside the circle, the grass was dry, brittle, yellowed, and completely flattened. In stark contrast, the surrounding field remained tall, thick, and untouched. The most unsettling part was the complete absence of any signs of disturbance. No footprints, no bike tracks, no indication that anything had recently passed through. The circle was about 10 feet across and seemed to have been there for days, judging by the grass's dryness. I stopped running and carefully circled the area, searching for any path or disruption in the brush. Nothing. The grass outside the circle stood perfectly upright, with no broken stems or crushed leaves. From every angle, the scene remained identical. Dead grass inside, healthy grass outside, and zero evidence of passage. A quiet, persistent wrongness hung in the air. It felt like the field was guarding a secret it refused to reveal. I considered whether a farmer or hunter might have caused this, but could think of no explanation. No burnt smell, no debris, just that precise ring of dead grass forming a perfect circle. Just as I was about to continue my run, my dog Remy stopped dead in her tracks. She stared at the circle, completely unlike her normally curious self. Her tail was low, her ears pulled back. When I knelt down and called her, she didn't move, instead watching the circle like it was a warning. Her reaction made me nervous. I pulled her back, and we moved away. Glancing back, I noticed something odd about the shadows. The circle seemed to cast no shadow at all, while the surrounding grass clearly did. I blinked, looked again, but the effect remained. Unsettled, I ran back up the hill. A few minutes later, a faint sound made me pause. I was running with my dog Remy near the Cascade foothills, just a couple hours from Seattle. A low, steady humming caught my attention. It wasn't the wind or a distant truck. Something about it felt different. Mechanical, yet soft, the sound seemed to come from a specific direction where I'd noticed a strange circle in the grass earlier. Remy went stiff, her hackles raised. She wouldn't respond when I called. Then I realized my watch had reset, jumping back nearly 20 minutes. I was certain the time had been correct before I passed the ridge. Checking my phone's GPS, I saw a straight-running path with no odd detours. But something wasn't adding up between the clock and my memory. I decided to leave quickly. Jogging back, I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, scanning the tree line and fields like something might jump out. The humming faded, but an unsettling feeling remained, as if I were being watched or followed. Back at the car, I let Remy drink water and tried to calm down. My eyes kept drifting back toward the hills. The circle and the unnatural silence in the field didn't make sense. The time discrepancy was especially strange. The next day, I returned with friends and a camera, hoping to find a rational explanation. But the circle had vanished. The grass looked uniform. Same color, same height, no dead patch. We searched everywhere, but found no evidence of disturbance. I took photos and video from the same spot, yet nothing showed what I'd seen before. Since then, I can't stop thinking about the perfectly dead grass, the unexplained circle, Remy's reaction, and that mysterious humming. I can't explain what happened, but something about that spot felt fundamentally wrong, like it existed outside the world I understand. Now, I avoid running in that area entirely. Scout was usually pretty laid back, but he had this odd habit of staring into the trees for long stretches. Completely still. We didn't think much of it before. Just another weird dog thing. Our day had been pretty standard. We hiked a bit, explored the creek, and tried spotting wildlife. A few birds and squirrels made their usual forest sounds, but nothing remarkable. After returning to camp, we cooked dinner over the fire and spent the evening chatting under the stars. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a faint, luminous smear. I went to bed around 11:30. The night seemed completely normal. Liam's tent was quiet, with Scout curled up at his feet. Just the soft crackling of the dying fire and occasional owl hoots broke the silence. Nothing seemed out of place. Morning changed everything. Around 7, I was the first to wake. When I checked the fire pit, I realized our food was gone. We'd packed carefully, sealed jerky, canned beans, trail mix, even a loaf of bread. All vanished. The bags had been zipped securely in our backpacks the night before. I searched the campsite thoroughly. No wrappers, no trash, no signs of animal interference. Liam woke up and confirmed the same thing. His food was missing too. His locked cooler stood wide open and completely empty. Strangely, nothing else was disturbed. The tents remained untouched, gear exactly where we'd left it. Scout seemed unperturbed. No barking, no excitement, just sitting there looking bored. We started scanning the ground, wondering how the food could have disappeared. That's when we found the footprints. They weren't animal tracks, and they definitely weren't human. Small, about 2 inches long and barely an inch wide, with an unusual oval shape. They were scattered around the clearing's edge, not forming any clear path. In some spots, they clustered together, almost like something had shifted weight repeatedly in one place. I'd been driving all day, pulling my rig from Oklahoma to Colorado, the usual grind for long-haul trucking. It was late October, just after dusk, with a sky heavy with low clouds that smelled like rain but didn't quite deliver. My eyes were starting to blur from the endless stretch of highway, so I decided to pull into a rest area I hadn't used before. A little patch of asphalt off the interstate, ringed by thick woods. I killed the engine, stretched my legs, and grabbed a thermos of coffee before stepping outside. The air was crisp and sharp. Scout, my dog, was alert but calm. When I looked down, I noticed something strange. Footprints near where we'd set up camp. They were pressed gently into the ground, almost as if something incredibly light had stepped carefully. The prints were clear from the night's dew, but there were no mud or drag marks. We searched the area thoroughly. Liam and I checked for broken twigs, bent branches, or disturbed leaves, but everything appeared normal. No scratch marks, no drag lines, nothing that explained how our food had vanished overnight. We were uneasy. Liam suggested it might be a raccoon or weasel, but the tracks didn't match any wildlife in his guide book. After a basic breakfast of instant coffee and our remaining water, we packed up to leave. I felt like something was watching us, though I tried to convince myself it was just nerves. On the hike back to the car, Scout kept stopping and staring into the trees. He wasn't growling or scared, just intensely focused. Liam and I exchanged worried glances but stayed silent. The woods seemed different, quieter than before, as if something had shifted overnight. Back at the car, I pulled up the photos of the footprints. Liam zoomed in, trying to identify something familiar. Nothing made sense. That night, I kept replaying the morning in my mind. The vanished food, those odd prints, Scout's behavior, the unnatural silence. There was no obvious explanation. I've returned to the spot several times with others, but we never found that circle of prints again. The trees looked the same, the ground firm and dry. No missing food, no footprints, no disturbances, just an empty forest. I don't know if whatever took the food was trying to avoid detection or if something else was at play. Some mysteries remain unsolved. But now, every time I go camping, I check my gear twice. And Scout? He still stares into the woods, like he's waiting for something to emerge from between the trees. The morning air was thick with the scent of wet leaves and pine as I leaned against my truck, sipping coffee to shake off the last remnants of sleep. Birch, my German Shepherd mix, stood close by, his tail wagging but his demeanor alert. He always had a sixth sense about these things. The rest area was nearly empty, with just one car parked near the tree line. That's when I saw it, a figure standing just inside the woods, about 6 feet tall, with an unusual soft, pale glow radiating from its body. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, thinking the dim street lamp might be playing tricks. But the figure remained, perfectly still, watching. No sounds broke the eerie silence. No wildlife rustled in the trees, just this quiet, unsettling presence. Birch's low growl told me something wasn't right. I gripped his leash tighter and inched closer to the forest's edge, trying to get a better look without getting too close. The figure didn't react at all. Just as I was about to call out, headlights sliced through the darkness. A car rolled into the parking lot, and when the light hit the forest's edge, the glowing figure vanished. Completely. No trace remained. I scanned the tree line frantically, but saw nothing. That night, I slept in my truck with the windows cracked open. Each time I woke up, I'd look toward the woods, half expecting the glow to reappear, but nothing came. The next morning, maintenance trucks pulled into the nearly empty rest area. I asked one of the workers if anyone had been hanging around the forest lately. He shrugged, mentioning that hikers and campers sometimes use the woods, but hadn't seen anything unusual. I might have dismissed it as a trick of tired eyes or a strange reflection. But Birch wasn't one to imagine things. He remained on edge all morning, ears twitching, eyes fixed on the woods. As I drove off after breakfast, the memory lingered. And in quiet, lonely stretches of road, I'd find myself remembering that unexplained, glowing figure. The night was quiet, and the woods pressed close to the road. A glowing figure stood motionless, watching, then vanished without a sound the moment headlights appeared. I've never seen anything like it again, but Birch still gets nervous driving past thick woods after dark. Was it just someone with a flashlight and an odd coat? Maybe something else entirely. I can't be sure, but that quiet presence in the dark, just watching, it stuck with me. Cold air hit my face when I woke up. Not the kind of chill from a draft, but as if the temperature had dropped suddenly around me. I was camping alone near Lake Shasta, on the north side where no official sites exist, just forest, steep hills, and occasional logging roads washed out by winter. My tent sat at the base of a slope, about 100 yards from the shoreline. Late September, clear and dry during the day, but nights turned chilly. I'd made a small fire, heated a tin of chili, and gone to sleep around 10, slept deeply. No drinks, no drugs, nothing unusual. At exactly 3:14 a.m., I sat up. I know the time precisely because I checked my watch immediately. The tent flap was wide open, zipper pulled halfway down. That stopped me cold. I always zip the tent fully, always. It's a habit to keep bugs out and heat in. I'd never leave it open, not even when getting up to relieve myself. At first, I thought maybe I'd unzipped it while sleeping. I'd never done that before, but who knows? Then I saw my gear. Every electronic item, phone, GPS, headlamp, even my spare battery pack, was outside the tent. Arranged in a perfect straight line on the pine needles, about 6 feet out beyond the rainfly's edge. Each item placed with precision, a few inches between them. I stared for a long time. Nothing was turned on. My phone was completely powered off, something I never do. It stays in airplane mode when I'm out here. The GPS was off too. The headlamp I'd left zipped inside the tent's gear pocket was now sitting with the rest, bulb facing up. It didn't feel like a prank. No one else was out there. I hadn't seen another soul since parking 2 days earlier and hiking in. The area is incredibly remote. The forest was eerily silent. No wind, no bugs, no rustling, like everything had shut off. I knew these trails well, and if someone had entered my campsite, I would have heard them. But I hadn't. There were no footprints around the tent, and the pine needles looked undisturbed, except for my own tracks from the night before. I checked my pockets. Wallet, knife, keys, all present. Something felt off, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd had some strange episode, gotten up half asleep and moved things without remembering. The explanation sounded less convincing the longer I considered it. Gathering my belongings, I did a quick sweep around the tent. Nothing seemed disturbed. I zipped the flap tight, secured it with my small clip, and lay back down. Sleep was impossible. I just listened. Around 4:30, I drifted into a heavy, half-conscious state. That's when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic clicking, faint but distinct like two pieces of plastic tapping together. The sound came from behind the tent, uphill. Click, click, pause. Click, click. I remained motionless, trying to determine the source. An animal? Branches? Something else? The clicking continued for about 5 minutes, then stopped completely. I waited another 10 minutes before sitting up and reaching for my headlamp. Dead. Fully charged, just the day before and never used. My GPS was unresponsive. The phone powered on but behaved strangely, screen glitching, apps jumping erratically as if someone was controlling it remotely. Then it shut down entirely. When sunrise finally came, I emerged from the tent and examined the slope behind me. Unusual marks dotted the dry, loose dirt. Not quite footprints, but heavy depressions spaced a few feet apart. They zigzagged from the trees toward my tent, stopping just short of the rainfly. I walked to the lake, hoping to clear my head. Turning back toward the camp, I saw a shape standing motionless among the trees. I was up before sunrise like usual around 5. April mornings are still chilly, with frost on the grass and breath visible when stepping out. The cold settles into your fingers before the sun clears the trees. My place sits about 15 miles outside Luna, Colorado. Flat land with few neighbors, mostly dry grazing pasture and an old windmill pump that's been sputtering since February. I've got 18 head of cattle, mostly Hereford mixes, and 2 mules named Dot and Charlie. That morning, I walked the fence line with my coffee, counting the herd as always. The cattle were bunched up near the east fence, huddled together like they do when the wind shifts overnight. But one cow stood apart. Nora, a 6-year-old with a typically calm temperament, not prone to spooking or wandering. This morning, she was about 60 yards from the others, dead center in the lower field, just standing there. She didn't look hurt. No limping, no signs of a fall, but something was off. She wasn't grazing or chewing or flicking her ears like normal. Instead, she was stiff, legs locked, neck rigid, head straight forward, eyes wide open, like she was watching something I couldn't see. I called her name and walked closer. Usually, if you get within 20 feet, she'll turn and look, or at least blink, but she didn't move. In the distance, maybe 50 yards away, and mostly hidden behind a trunk, I caught a glimpse of something. Part of a shoulder, perhaps. I called out. No response. When I stepped toward it, it moved quickly and silently deeper into the woods, vanishing in seconds. I didn't chase it. I packed everything up fast, shoving gear into my pack without folding or wrapping. I was on the trail within 10 minutes and hiked back to the truck in under 4 hours. When I finally had phone signal again, the device wouldn't boot. I tried charging it from the car. Nothing. A week later, I had to get a new one. The repair guy couldn't recover anything, saying the hardware was corrupted. The GPS suffered the same fate, never powering on again. My headlamp was the only item that worked after a battery change, though its bulb flickered weakly when turned on. I haven't camped solo since. I still go out sometimes, but always with friends. I bring my gear and zip the tent tight, but every now and then I wake up in the dark and check to make sure everything's still inside, still zipped, still there. I was out checking the horses when I noticed something strange with Nora. She stood completely still, barely a twitch. The sun was rising, casting a dry, static light across the landscape. No birds sang. Something I'd only realize was odd later. Approaching slowly from the side, I didn't want to startle her. Her chest rose with shallow breaths, but she was eerily motionless. No tail swish, no fly stomping, nothing. When I got close enough to touch her, an unsettling feeling washed over me, like walking into a room and forgetting why you came. Her flank was rigid, muscles hard and tense under her skin. I waved my hand in front of her eye. No reaction. Her pupils were huge, eyes glassy and wide. I put the halter on and tried guiding her back to the pen, but she was like a statue. Then I heard it. A faint humming, barely audible, coming from somewhere north above the tree line. I scanned the horizon. No planes, no dust trails, nothing. Just a steady, metallic hum that remained constant, neither growing louder nor changing pitch. As I listened, something shifted. Nora's eyes started tracking something invisible, moving slowly left to right without her head moving. I followed her gaze but saw only empty air. The sun was high enough to illuminate everything, yet nothing was there. Suddenly, the humming stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. Nora blinked and then staggered, her legs remembering how to move. She took slow, shaky steps and let out a low, drawn-out bellow. The rest of the herd responded, moving toward her from the fence line. I walked her back myself. She moved like she was coming out of anesthesia, clumsy and dazed. Once in the pen, she went straight to the water, standing there a moment before drinking. I checked her thoroughly, eyes, mouth, hooves, finding no wounds or swelling, just that lingering sense of confusion. Walked out to the same spot in the field that night. The moon was about half full, with no wind or clouds. I stood where she'd been earlier. Nothing seemed unusual. The grass wasn't burned or pressed down, but something felt off. The silence was eerie. No frogs from the pond, no night birds. Even the windmill had stopped its usual creaking. I stayed maybe 15 minutes, feeling watched the entire time, though I couldn't pinpoint the source. Earlier that day, Nora had been strange. She stayed mostly still, barely moving. She ate a little hay around dusk. The next morning, she was back to normal, eating fine, walking without hesitation or stiffness. A couple days later, I called the vet and explained what happened. He mentioned cattle sometimes freeze during seizures or after lightning strikes, though we hadn't seen a storm in over a week. He came out, ran tests, checked her blood and eyes. Everything looked normal. No parasites, no infections. I kept quiet about the strange sound and her eyes tracking something invisible. I didn't want to sound crazy. A week after the incident, I noticed something odd on my barn's tin roof. On the north side, there was a perfect black circle about the size of a dinner plate. It wasn't a stain, just a smooth patch where the metal looked different. It faded like it had been bleached or sanded. Scrubbing didn't help, and paint wouldn't stick to it. Nora's fine now, just like always, but she won't go near that lower field anymore. Not even close. Night was black and quiet, broken only by the steady hum of our aircraft. Something caught my eye, lights moving across the sky with an unnatural precision. 4 bright dots danced in a loose diamond formation, defying everything I knew about flight. These weren't normal aircraft movements. Sharp, impossible turns cut through the darkness, zigzagging in ways no plane could manage. No smooth arcs, no predictable trajectory. I called Joe over silently, pointing. He saw it too. The lights maintained a constant brightness, ruling out distant aircraft. No blinking navigation lights, just steady, intense points of light. Something was definitely off. I radioed air traffic control. Falcon 57, any traffic at our 12 o'clock? The response was immediate and crisp. No other aircraft in the vicinity. Our radar was clear. Joe and I exchanged a look. We'd seen plenty during night cargo runs, but this was different. The lights suddenly froze midair, suspended for what felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, they rocketed upward, straight into the stars, vanishing faster than anything I'd ever witnessed. Silence filled the cockpit. When I tried to radio ATC again, nothing. The communication system was completely dead. No static, no sound. Just absolute quiet. Then, just as suddenly, the radio crackled back to life with a routine check-in. Minutes later, Joe spotted something else. A dark shape gliding silently beneath the clouds, barely visible against the moonlight. We looked at each other, both knowing we'd just experienced something extraordinary. I'd just gotten back into jogging after taking a few months off for a sprained ankle. Nothing dramatic. Late August, a little past 9 p.m., I was finally starting to hit my rhythm again. Walking my neighbor's dog, I stepped off a curb and headed to Millwood Park. It's a small loop, nothing special. One paved path, scattered benches, a duck pond, and a few swing sets with faded blue rubber flooring. The park backs up against a residential neighborhood on one side and a small stretch of woods on the other. Pretty quiet most of the time. I like running that loop after dark because no one's ever really there. Just a couple dog walkers sometimes. Maybe some teenager vaping behind the gazebo. That night, I didn't even see that. I had my earbuds in at first, but I took them out after the first lap. Not sir, EY. Something about the stillness made me feel weird about not being able to hear what was going on around me. It wasn't like anything felt wrong. Exactly. Just off. There were these little things I started noticing as I rounded the bend near the tennis courts. First, I realized I hadn't seen a single car on the roads that bordered the park. Usually you'll catch headlights going by every couple minutes, parents picking up their kids. The heat was that sticky Missouri kind, where the air feels heavy, but it cools just enough once the sun's been down a while. During another flight, something similar happened that still haunts me. I turned to look, but whatever it was vanished before I could get a good look. The rest of the flight passed without incident, but the feeling of being watched lingered. When we landed, I checked the official flight logs and radar tapes with the company's operations center. Nothing showed up. No unknown aircraft, no radar anomalies, nothing. Since then, I've gone back over every detail 100 times. The zigzag patterns, the silent disappearance, the radio glitch. It wasn't fatigue or a hallucination. Joe saw it too, and ATC confirmed no traffic. I don't know what those lights were, but they definitely weren't planes. And they weren't satellites or weather balloons either. Just 4 moving points of light performing maneuvers that defied everything I know about flight. Sometimes I catch myself looking up at the night sky on a clear evening, wondering if they'll show up again. The park seemed ordinary enough as I finished my second lap. Street lamps lined the trail, casting orange light over everything. A metal trash can near the basketball court was full, but not overflowing. The water fountain dripped steadily. Yet something felt off. I'd been running, passing familiar landmarks. The duck pond was behind me, and I was heading toward the playground's cluster of streetlights. That's when things changed. First, one light flickered slightly, like a bulb about to die. Then, the next one. Then the third. They were perfectly spaced about 30 feet apart and started flickering in an unnervingly synchronized pattern. Buzzing, dimming, brightening, the lights moved with an almost deliberate rhythm. I stopped running and pulled out my phone. 9:13 p.m. The thunderstorm from 2 nights ago couldn't explain this strange timing. Something felt intentional about the way the lights were behaving. After around 20 seconds, all 3 lights went completely dead. Not just off, but dead. No buzzing, no glow, just black poles standing in darkness. And then instantly, everything went silent. The bugs stopped. No crickets, no cicadas, no rustling leaves, no distant car sounds. Total silence, as if the air had been sucked away. That's when I saw the light. Small, blindingly white, hovering about 30 or 40 feet above the treetops on the wooded side of the park, maybe 100 yards away. It didn't blink. It didn't move. Strangest of all, it cast no shadows. Despite being so bright, it was painful to look at directly. The night was quiet, dark. 3 streetlights hung motionless against the sky, barely visible. I stood frozen, arms pulled tight against my body, breath shallow and uneven. Something felt wrong. A light appeared, suspended above the tree line, not moving quickly or slowly, but gliding smoothly like it was following an invisible track. It passed behind a large oak, and I waited. Seconds ticked by. 1, 2, 3. Nothing emerged. I stepped forward, my foot crunching on gravel. The sound seemed impossibly loud, breaking the silence. Suddenly, behind me, the streetlights began flickering, out of sync, unnatural. One would flash twice, another would buzz, then all would go dark. It felt like something was attempting to mimic light, but didn't quite understand how, like a distant observer making a clue. Miss, I guess. I walked quickly toward the trail exit, passing close to the woods. The light had vanished. By the time I reached the sidewalk, everything seemed normal. Bugs hummed, distant traffic sounds returned. Streetlights looked unchanged. I jogged home and told no one, not my sister when she called the next day. I didn't run again for 2 weeks. The next morning, around 6 a.m., I took my dog Olive, a scruffy mutt with bad knees, for her usual walk. Near the park's north entrance, she stopped dead. Not sniffing, not curious, just staring toward the trees, completely still. I waited, tugged her leash. She didn't move. Then, from deep in the trees, a short, high-pitched click broke the silence. Late April, a Thursday night bleeding into Friday. I'd just finished second shift at the plant, getting home a little after 1 a.m. My neighborhood in Newton, Iowa, is the kind of place where everyone knows each other well enough to wave, but keeps to themselves. Old ranch-style houses, modest yards, porch lights always on without a second thought. That night was calm and clear, temperatures hovering around mid-40s. I dropped my boots, poured some tea, and settled on the couch. My blue heeler mix, Finley, was already asleep on the rug near the sliding door. At exactly 2:17 a.m., something strange happened. Every electronic device in the house shut down simultaneously. Lights, TV, router, even my watch backlight went dark. The fridge made an odd chuffing sound and fell silent. 2 seconds later, everything blinked back on. No surge, no flicker, just an instant reset. Finley's reaction was immediate and unusual. She leapt up and bolted down the hall, wedging herself under the guest room bed, something she never does. This dog doesn't flinch at thunderstorms or fireworks, but now she was different. A low rumble started seconds later. Not like thunder, but deeper and steadier. You didn't hear it so much as feel it, similar to standing near a big truck engine, except no engines were around. When I opened the sliding door, an unnatural silence greeted me. No traffic, no wind, no insects, no night birds, no distant train whistle, just a pervasive hum coming from everywhere and nowhere. The air felt heavy, holding its breath. In my socks, I stepped onto the cold concrete patio. Everything was motionless. The neighbor's porch light across the street seemed odd. Its beam didn't reach the ground normally. It was like looking through a nighttime heat mirage, a vague blur surrounding the light, though no fog existed. The hum lasted about half a minute. Olive turned and walked back the way we came without me needing to pull. I didn't argue. Now, months later, I still run at night sometimes, but never at that park. The morning started strange. My lights and screen went black, then stopped all at once. No gradual fade, just instant silence. Finley, my dog, began whining from the guest room, shaking and refusing to come out. I had to slide the bed to reach her, and she stayed pressed against me like glue for the rest of the night. By morning, I half convinced myself I dreamed it or it was just a power glitch. But something felt off during our walk. Mrs. Cordell, the widow down the street, stood in her robe staring up at the trees. When I said good morning, she asked if my lights went out too. She told me it happened at 17 after 2, right when her vintage record player started on its own, playing a classical record she hadn't touched in weeks. Mr. Alvarez looked wired on his porch. His weather station had reset and beeped as if unplugged, and his microwave clock flashed. He thought he might be having a stroke at first. He mentioned a strange humming, like a low-flying plane, except nothing passed overhead, just pure pressure. His cat, Mango, hid behind the dryer until noon. By the end of the cul-de-sac, I'd spoken to 4 neighbors. Every single one mentioned the same time, 2:17. Most had animals that acted weird. Mrs. Cordell's usually loud parrot stayed silent until dinner. The McKay's retriever chewed through the laundry room baseboard. Back home, I checked my router logs, an old habit from troubleshooting streaming issues. A complete blank space existed from 27:03 to 27:44. Then everything resumed normally. That night, I set up an old Bushnell trail cam on a tree, pointing toward the back fence, wondering if maybe a coyote or raccoon had triggered something. I'd been living in this quiet neighborhood for a while when something strange happened. One night, between 2 and 3 a.m., I set up a trail cam in the yard and left my phone recording audio, just on a whim. The next day, reviewing the footage, one video caught my attention. Time-stamped at 2:1718, the 30-second clip showed an empty yard suddenly illuminated by 3 distinct cold light pulses. These weren't like lightning, no gradual flash and fade. Tree shadows seemed to jump as if something invisible passed overhead, shifting in an unnatural way. The phone audio was even more unsettling. At 21:7112, a sharp crackle like microphone feedback gave way to a low, vibrating tone that continued for about 30 seconds. At one point, the faintest thump suggested something had touched the window glass. Finley, my dog, was deeply affected. She started avoiding the back door entirely, and I had to move her food bowl. During the day, she'd stare up at nothing, ears pinned, tracking something invisible to me. A week later, I distributed flyers in our neighborhood asking if anyone had experienced anything unusual that night. The response was remarkable. 8 people texted, 2 called. Every single person reported something odd with their electronics or pets. One neighbor's security camera had corrupted footage, freezing at 2:17 and jumping to 2:18 with static in between. Another household reported their fish tank inexplicably lighting up like a strobe, even with the power strip off. No one saw anything in the sky, no flash or crash. But every clock showed the same time, and every pet acted as if something apocalyptic was happening. The incident never repeated with such intensity. Yet even now, every couple of months, Finley still wakes at 2:17 precisely, staring at the ceiling as if waiting for something to return. The sun cast long shadows, turning everything orange as I drove. I'd left Phoenix that morning, planning to stop for gas in Page and maybe get a room if fatigue set in. The GPS had routed me onto State Route 98, an unfamiliar narrow highway that seemed like a quicker route. My cell signal disappeared an hour earlier, but the map remained loaded, so I continued. For miles, the landscape was unchanging. No cars, no billboards, no gas stations, no fences, just sand and emptiness. The drive was almost meditative until something shifted. Cresting a rise, I dipped into a shallow canyon where the road curved and then stretched straight between 2 ridges. Out of habit, I checked the rearview mirror and spotted headlights. 2 of them, close. This was strange because I hadn't passed anyone and there had been no turnoffs or lights for hours. Suddenly, someone was following me. I slowed slightly, hoping the vehicle would catch up. Maybe it was a ranger or local resident. But the lights maintained the exact same distance, not gaining, not falling back, just persistently present. I tapped my brakes. No response. No flash of headlights. No acknowledgement. The most unsettling part was the car's invisibility. Only bright lights were visible, steady and unnaturally consistent. They didn't bounce or shift like typical headlights navigating terrain. After several miles, I rationalized it might be a trick of perspective, perhaps a truck on a distant highway creating an optical illusion. Deciding to investigate, I pulled onto a wide gravel shoulder, hazards blinking. The lights continued approaching. But when I checked the side mirror, nothing was there. The rear view still showed the lights, yet the side mirror reflected only empty desert. I even leaned out the window, searching. Then I noticed something impossible. The road behind me had vanished. Where asphalt and yellow lines had been moments ago, now only rocky scrubland existed. My tires remained on pavement, but the landscape had fundamentally transformed. I couldn't explain how or why. I stepped out of the car. The wind carried a dry, hot desert smell. I walked a few feet behind the vehicle, confused. The road was impossible. It seemed to start right under my back tires and vanish before that point. No matter how I looked, I couldn't see it stretching back as it should. Checking the mirror again, I confirmed the lights were still behind me. I climbed back in and started driving, moving steadily. My eyes stayed locked on the rearview mirror. The lights remained in the same spot, then suddenly disappeared after about 5 minutes. No gradual fade, no road curve to hide them. Just gone. This didn't bring relief. Instead, I felt watched, constantly glancing over my shoulder despite knowing nothing was there. Miles passed. The sun dropped low, turning the desert flat and gray. Suddenly, my headlights flickered twice before stabilizing. I tapped the dashboard, assuming a loose wire. The rental had been making strange sounds since I picked it up. A minute later, the engine whined softly, RPMs dipping. The car jerked once, then smoothed out. That's when movement caught my eye. Something crossed the road ahead, quick, low to the ground. In my peripheral vision, it didn't move like a coyote, it glided. Slowing down, I saw nothing. No prints, no shape disappearing into the brush. The air changed, heavy, no longer hot, just thick. Static began emerging through the speakers, even with the radio off. A low hiss, barely noticeable, started rising like an approaching storm. I turned the knob. Nothing changed. Attempting to shut the stereo off completely failed. It didn't respond. The hiss built up, then suddenly cut out. Silence. I noticed the sky. Not fully dark, but stars were already visible, except directly overhead. A perfect, still circle of empty sky remained, too precise to be a cloud. Continuing to drive, lights appeared again, but this time off to the side. About half a mile out, 2 lights floated low over the desert, moving slowly. I thought maybe a drone or tower, until they split, one going left, one right. I worked nights at a 24-hour diner downtown in Asheville, North Carolina, living in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. My street winds through old maples and oaks, mostly lined with families who've been here for generations. Sleep has been hard to come by lately, and I'm usually running on very little rest. Around 3:12 a.m., for about 2 weeks straight, a weird humming would appear above my house. It wasn't like a car idling or a distant plane. This sound was low and steady, almost mechanical, but somehow soft, like a lullaby played on a speaker you can't quite pinpoint. At first, I thought it might be the heater or a neighbor's generator, but the noise was too precise, always the same time, always the same pitch. I'd be lying in bed, half drowsy, when suddenly this faint buzz would creep into the air. Later, I found myself driving on a lonely road. Something felt off from the start. Both something, I'm not sure what, rose and dropped in the sink before vanishing. I pulled over, needing to catch my breath. When I stepped out, a high-pitched humming filled the air. Not from the car, but surrounding me. It was constant, like a TV playing in another room. I stood there for maybe half a minute when I heard a soft crunch behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Another crunch, closer this time. Something was moving through the brush, just beyond my sight. Spooked, I got back in the car and locked the doors. I sped down the road faster than I should have. Eventually, a sign for Page appeared, about 20 miles out. The road widened, and civilization started creeping back, occasional fence posts and distant lights. The second I hit the town limits, everything stopped. The static, the humming, the weird pressure in the air, all gone. I pulled into a gas station and sat in the lot for 10 minutes, just staring at the lights, other people, the pavement, normal things. I looked behind me. The road was there, plain as day. 2 lanes, yellow stripes, tire marks. But something was wrong. The car's trip meter showed 89 miles, when I should have driven about 130 miles that day. I'm not great at tracking days when I'm exhausted, but this didn't add up. The humming began precisely at 3:12 a.m., a pattern that quickly became impossible to ignore. At first, I chalked it up to exhaustion or some woodland creature making noise. My backyard borders a small forest, just enough space for deer and raccoons, but this sound was nothing like typical animal sounds. Each night, the humming grew more intense. I'd lie in bed, listening to this steady, almost musical drone that seemed to hover just above my house. It felt so subtle, almost like it was resonating inside my head, yet I knew it was definitely external. The moment I opened the back door, the sound would vanish instantly, as if someone had flipped an invisible switch. Curious and slightly unnerved, I started asking neighbors about any strange nighttime sounds. Most claimed they slept soundly or hadn't noticed anything unusual. Jim, an older neighbor 2 houses down, mentioned occasionally hearing odd sky noises, but attributed them to planes or wind interfering with power lines. I kept the specifics to myself, the precise timing, and the way the sound disappeared when I stepped outside. Other strange occurrences began catching my attention during these early morning hours. Streetlights would flicker briefly just before the humming started, creating an eerie sense of anticipation. The neighborhood seemed to pause, holding its breath for a moment. Determined to capture evidence, I set up my phone's recorder on the kitchen counter one night. When the familiar humming began, I hit record and listened intently. Predictably, as soon as I opened the back door, the sound vanished completely. The cool, rain-scented air greeted me as I shined my flashlight into the dark sky and surrounding trees, but nothing was visible. No planes, no drones, not a single moving light. Only the distant sounds of crickets and an owl broke the silence. The humming had become a constant, unsettling presence. At first, it was barely noticeable, but when I tried recording it, my phone captured nothing. Something was happening that technology couldn't detect. My ears heard what my devices couldn't. Weeks passed, and an eerie sensation of being watched crept in. Whenever the humming started, a prickling feeling would rise on the back of my neck, as if something lingered just beyond my perception. I'd look up, seeing only dark clouds or hidden stars. With my phone's flashlight, I'd walk around the yard, scanning treetops and sky, searching for something, anything. The trees seemed normal, shadows dancing with the breeze. Yet an undeniable feeling persisted that I wasn't alone. One night, the humming changed. It became more intense, like a vibrating cord stretched through the air. I initially thought it might be a plane or helicopter, but I knew those sounds. This was different, quieter, more controlled. Inside the house, I'd pace during these moments, opening and closing doors, flipping lights on and off, anything to distract myself from the noise and the sense that something was waiting for me outside. Then came the strange clock incidents. One morning, well before dawn, my wristwatch was off by a few minutes. I wasn't sure if I'd set it wrong, but that day, my phone's clock showed the exact same discrepancy, 11 minutes. I checked every clock in the house, wall clock, microwave, alarm clock, none aligned. I reset everything, thinking a power surge might be responsible, but it happened again the next night. That's when I started getting worried. I began documenting everything. The precise times of the humming, the flickering streetlights, and Clover's behavior. My old border collie had never been like this before. Normally a deep sleeper, during these nights she'd suddenly become alert. Her head would lift, ears straight, eyes focused upward. A low, uneasy whine would escape her. She'd try to go outside to the backyard, but I'd always stop her. The last night I ventured out during the humming would be